We call them peelers. Some of them are return customers, while others only come in the one time and leave in tears, streaking blood across the diner floor. What they do is called peeling, and it's the new dumb fad kids are into nowadays. I'd rather see them choke on snorted condoms than peeling in our bathroom stalls, because at least the condoms don't make a bloody mess. From what I hear, peeling isn't really a self-harm kind of thing like cutting is. It's more a rite of passage, the way some kids challenge each other to see who can hold their palm over an open flame the longest. In the case of peeling, instead of a flame, they use a potato peeler and see who can peel off the longest chunk of skin in a single curl. The whole thing is so dumb on so many levels. I can usually tell when a group is about to do it. They shoot each other this conspiratorial look over the top of the menu they hide behind and, one by one, sneak into the bathroom when they think no one is looking. It's usually guys, but some girls do it too. I try to stop them when I can, but I'm not a babysitter, and I've got paying customers to serve, so I can't always get involved in their dumb dick measuring contest. I was concerned back when they first started peeling a few weeks ago, but I quickly realized most kids can't handle the pain. They usually only manage to cut a small sliver, about the size you'd scrape off by accidentally slashing yourself with your thumbnail, but I've seen a guy run out of the bathroom with blood-soaked napkins from his wrist halfway up his forearm. I guess some people handle the pain better than others. The manager joked about putting up a no skin, no service sign in the window, but that'd be about as good as a deterrent as candy wrappers on a dick. I thought I'd become desensitized to the whole thing, more annoyed than concerned, but last night, the sick practice was taken to a whole other level. If I seem nonchalant now, it's not because I'm desensitized, it's because I'm probably still in shock. It had been a busy night at the diner, and as a result, I'd not been as vigilant as I could have been. I was running from table to table, dealing with drunks and kids from the high school across the street coming in for a post-end-of-year dance snack. It felt like half the student body came through our door that night, and by closing time, I was so exhausted and eager to get home, I forgot to lock the door before I flipped the open sign over to the closed side. I was in the back sweeping the floor when I heard the chime of the bell above the door. By the time I got to the front of the diner, there was no one there. I figured whoever had opened the door saw the place was empty and the lights were dimmed, and so they'd walked back out in search of a fast food place. It never occurred to me to check the bathrooms. I locked the front door and went back to sweeping, telling the chef it was nothing. I'd earned the least amount of tips that night, short by a mere $1.50, so it was my job to clean the washrooms while the other waitresses left out the back door. The manager was in his office, looking over inventory or something and waiting for me to finish up so he could lock up. No greater motivator to go fast than to know your boss is waiting on you. I cleaned the girls' washroom in no time and then hauled a large box of cleaning supplies into the boys' much dirtier washroom. The first thing I noticed was the potato peeler, sitting in the urinal farthest from the door. Someone's mom was going to be very upset they'd lost it, I thought. On the other hand, it had probably been peed on all night, probably used as target practice, so it was best it was never to be used for food ever again. I scooped it up with a wad of paper towels and tossed it in the bin. That's when I noticed the brown leather belt peeking out from under the stall. Great, I thought. Look, if you're going to have sex in a diner bathroom, at least have the decency to grab your clothes on the way out. You have no idea how many socks and panties we have to throw away in a month. It's a lot. I wadded up paper towels again because my hands are never touching anything that's been on the floor of that bathroom, and then reached down to take it. Is there even a way to describe what it felt like to lift it? It had the color and size of a belt. It was as heavy as one, but it didn't have the right thickness or rigidness. It was like grabbing an unspooled fruit by the foot, only it was warm and wet and made a slippery noise as I pulled it from the ground, like the sound of stepping on a fresh turd on a blistering summer day. I dropped it and it went limp on the ground. splattering a light dusting of blood on the tiles and over my feet. It was automatic. I'd dropped something, so my instinct was to pick it up and not drop it again. I bent over and grabbed the feeble belt, and as I did, I saw it stretched all the way into the stall and coiled around in a messy spiral much, much larger than any belt. It was more like a stringy blanket. Part of me knew and understood what I was seeing, but as I pushed open the stall door, my lizard brain kicked in and poured a thick syrup of numb disbelief over my mind. I started to pull the string of skin, unspooling it with ease. I lost the paper towels somewhere along the way, flesh touching wet, slippery flesh as I unraveled the blanket, a single continuous string, like flawlessly peeling a potato in one shot. I didn't even feel sick. I just acted. I just cleaned because that's what I was in the bathroom for. I put this massive mound of skin in a garbage bag and, staring blankly, exited the bathroom with the intention of tossing it in the bin outside. But then I noticed the streaks of blood on the floor I hadn't seen earlier because the box of cleaning supplies had been blocking the view. Still in shock, I dropped the bag of skin and followed the streaks of blood by gaze all the way down to a booth by the window. In the dim light, I could see a silhouette staring back at me. A puddle was forming beneath him. He peeked out from the side of the booth, and I thank my lucky stars the lights were too low to properly see his face, though my mind constructed the image regardless, based on memories from anatomy class. His movements were lethargic, and he sluggishly raised his hand and snapped his fingers, or he tried to. The sound wasn't a snap, but a sloshing of liquidy sinew against liquidy sinew. He spoke weakly.
"Menu, please."
I backed away, slowly inching my way to the manager's office. I heard the splatters of children's wet feet running by the pool coming from the seating area as I breached the threshold to his office. I murmured something about calling the cops, but I don't think my words made sense. The blood on my uniform spoke on my behalf, and the boss quickly shut and locked the door behind me. We waited in the office for 10 long minutes. Him trying to get more information, me barely able to string a single coherent sentence together. When the cops finally showed up, the skinless man was gone, leaving a trail of blood all the way to the back door. At least he had the courtesy of taking his skin with him.
When I was young, I was given this beautiful handmade dollhouse. It had real shingles and wallpaper. Some rooms even had carpeting. Even though it had all these details, it didn't have any windows or a functioning door. I would lay on my stomach with my chin resting on my hands, and I would imagine myself walking through it. There was a family of 4 living there that looked just like my set of dolls that I would play with in it. The daughter Emily and I had become good friends in the short time I had it. It was always so bright and cheery when I was there, unlike my home in reality. I created a little oasis in there for myself, or so I thought. Back in reality, my mom had called me for dinner. I excitedly told my parents all about what Emily and I had done during my visit. My mom looked strangely at my dad, and neither of them spoke a word. I looked down at my plate and ate the rest of my meal in silence. I laid in bed that night and pulled the comforter over my head while my parents argued, which is what they did every night when they thought I couldn't hear them. That night, they fought about the dollhouse. My mom said it needed to go because she had had nothing but nightmares since it arrived, and she had a bad feeling about it. Dad got mad and told her it was a dumb reason to get rid of it. He didn't believe in ghosts, hauntings, or anything of the sort. Upset that I may never see my friend again, I couldn't sleep. and as soon as my parents were in bed, I snuck downstairs with a flashlight and went for what possibly could have been one last visit. Emily greeted me with a hug, as she always did, but this visit, the house was different. It was very dark and musty, like a carpeted basement that had been leaking. I could feel the age of the house, if that makes sense. Emily and I walked to the living room and sat on the couch. There was a single lit candle on the coffee table, and I could barely see her face, even though she was right next to me. Normally, you could hear her mother humming from the other room, but now it was eerily quiet. "Where is everyone?" I asked. She sat there quietly for a moment, looking straight ahead before responding. "Father is home, so we have to be quiet." "Oh, okay," I responded. Her dad apparently was someone you didn't want to piss off. "Are you okay, Emily?" I asked. She stood up and walked to the staircase, so I followed her. What happened next still terrifies me to this day. She smiled at me and gave me a tight hug. I heard a loud gurgle in my ear and felt something roll down my back. Emily's head had fallen to the ground, and I was left standing there hugging onto her body. I let go of it and screamed. Her body fell to the ground. "You're supposed to be quiet," Emily's head snarled. Her body rolled to its stomach and started crawling towards me slowly like some kind of creepy, broken doll as her hands grabbed for my feet. I ran past her and up the stairs. At the top landing, I looked down and watched her slowly stagger to her feet. She then picked up her head and held it under her left arm. Twitching and growling, she glared at me from the bottom step. I ran for the attic, hoping I could find a way out from there. For some reason, I wasn't able to mentally leave the way I normally do. I was trapped. Shaking, I reached for the pull string to the attic stairs, and something fell out onto me. It was big and heavy. I couldn't move and struggled to get it off. I could hear Emily struggling to climb the stairs. In a panic, I finally pushed it off of me and looked at what had fallen, and to my surprise, it was Emily's dad. Her mom ran up out of nowhere, grabbed my wrist, and shoved me into the attic, locking it behind me. There wasn't much room in there, and there was no way out. It felt like my heart was going to explode. I heard the attic door being unlocked. It creaked loudly as it slowly opened. Emily was now at my feet. Her head looked like it had been crudely sewn back onto her body. It flopped to one side as if it was too heavy for her to hold up. Her eyes rolled into the back of her head until all I could see was white, and I heard this click as her jaw dislocated, extending down past her neck, and I could feel her breath on my leg as she drew closer. Suddenly, I smelled smoke, and Emily turned to look behind her. When she was distracted, I put my hands on her shoulders and shoved her, causing her to fall. I climbed out of the attic and rushed to the top landing of the stairs and looked down. There were flames everywhere, and it was getting harder to breathe. The last thing I remember seeing in there was Emily's mother with a pack of matches. She smiled and waved, then everything went dark. When I came out of the dollhouse, I was in an ambulance. "Mom, what happened?" "We heard the smoke detector, and When we came downstairs, the dollhouse was on fire, and you were passed out in front of it. No matter what your father did, he couldn't put it out. My mother responded, "What about Dad?" My mother shook her head sadly and hugged me tight. The dollhouse survived the fire without a scratch. It was put on the curb with the debris from the house, and within a month or so there was a news report about a house fire. The smoke detectors failed, and the whole family burned. All that was left was an old, beautiful, handmade dollhouse.
When he entered the room, to everyone else, it seemed just like another day. Businessman turned CEO on trial for contract violation. They weren't going to do much. They couldn't do much. Half of them had shares, and the other half, well, he knew they'd eventually see things his way. The silence in the walkway outside the massive enclosed chamber broke as the guards opened the doors. A cacophony of abhorrent chatter splashed on his skin like terrified ants. Somehow, his legs carried him uncomfortably into the room. Chairs lined the aisle towards his seat, and the room was fairly dim, which was odd for a trial like this, he thought. As those lazier members shifted their lard on the well-worn furniture, the chair legs creaked and groaned under the weight. Some of the weight was unbearable, and the chairs would seem to scream. More lifelike, he thought, than most of the dried-up corpses walking around this room. A cold chill, like poison sapping his strength, bled through his very skin. The scrutinizing gazes made it feel as if the room was alive with all those against him. His system was receiving this strange sensation, and his hairs all over his body prickled at the reprogrammed reaction. Just had to make it to his seat. He tried to clearly think, but as always, his motions felt almost automatic. His body repeated motions across the huge chamber until he arrived at the forehead of half of the United States Senate. He watched out of his peripheral Senators Thule and Gardner settle in, and suddenly,
"Sit,"
he heard in his head, the word forceful, a command, as with all the rest. And as the impulse settled in, without question, he took a seat, chair already reinforced to restore his strength. He knew it was being prepared for him, but to be able to charge while sitting at this trial would be very nice. The booster also rose him up a few inches, the illusion of command. As he settled into the chair, he watched Tester nervously preparing his Montana boy statement to address him, the master of the room. Most averted eye contact or irreverently stared at him. But Tester couldn't even find his own script, fumbling about like a baboon. Senator Cruz entered his range of view, and with the literally gigabytes of Zodiac killer memes flashing in his recent memory bank, the impulse to laugh had to be stifled by his understanding of tact. His face revealed no emotional reaction, though. He imagined laughing at Cruz as he shuffled in his seat with that innocent smile. Whatever questions he was about to ask would be no problem, that was certain. The glass of water near the edge before him made him nervous. He could feel the impulse sweat rising, even though he could not do it. Slowly, he pushed the glass further in the table. "We welcome everyone to today's hearing," Grassley spoke. First, there was panic. The chairman's words faded in and out of his ears as he gripped the table, consciousness too, fading in and out. He felt very weak and really unusual.
"Take a sip of water,"
the voice demanded, and he could not refuse. So he choked down the cold liquid, which should have, how he wished it would have, quenched his thirst. But even his wishing was a notion no longer his own. The room was alive with static. No one could see it, but his senses were heightened and his nervous system modified. So to him, it felt like his skin was alive. He knew why they did it, to drown out the other signals. While his multiple constructs run and rerun failsafes and create projections of potential futures, he settles into the stares of men around him for an afternoon of pointless and ignorant questioning. Some scrutinized him from afar, some just ecstatic to be in his presence, all fools to the real world. We're here because of what you yourself have described as a breach of trust. A voice came in between his processes and responses. There were men talking, he was certain, but his daze kept him immobilized. He could hone in and register a few moments of real conversation before the protocols reroute again.
Take a sip of water.
The cup rose to his mouth and slowly poured down his throat automatically. His chair was hot, but he felt nothing more than the cool water running through his insides. More free or extremely low-cost services requires us to give up more personal data. That's all you and others appear to want from the people. And why is that? His fingers tapped, and he shuffled in his seat. He couldn't stop himself from doing it. Couldn't remember the last time he ever tapped his fingers, but he guessed it was a popular anxiety symptom. His legs were clattering away under the desk, and it took an hour for him to realize that they had been going consistently since he sat down. Bugs in his head slowed down his understanding. It wasn't like this when he was all human, but now that he was only part, and not even the good parts, he felt like he had made a mistake all that time ago. You have a 14-year history for apologizing for ill-advised decisions. And why's that? The Mark 6 Suckerbot sat for a moment, protocols frozen, no answer at the ready. While he awaited commands, he wondered if he too would be shut down and replaced, like those before him. He wondered if the memories of his childhood were even real. He wondered if he was real, or what real was.
Take a sip of water.
Crash! I kept still in the bed, processing the sound of what I just heard. Did one of the windows just break? I thought to myself, half awake. When the familiar scream of a girl ripped through the silence, I knew I wasn't hearing things. I threw the covers from my bed and vaulted onto the wooden floor. I ran the short distance to Natalie's room. Father was already there, holding an oil lamp aloft to illuminate the darkness. The window was completely shattered and broken. Glass littered the floor. Natalie's bed was empty. I bolted back down the hall to my room, where I slipped on a pair of old worn leather boots and pulled a fur coat on over my nightshirt. Father moved past me down the hall wearing his own coat and carrying the lamp. I followed him through the back door and into the pitch-black darkness beyond. The night was moonless and completely dark. The abductions were becoming increasingly common over the past few days, but I had dared to hope that no one from our family would be the next victim. I picked up the maul that I used for chopping wood, but hoped I wouldn't need it. I sprinted after the bobbing yellow light as it grew smaller and smaller in the inky blackness of the night. The pine trees towered in front of me like sentinels, warning me of the danger that lay ahead. I took a deep breath, looked back at our tiny log cabin, and trudged into the forest. My sister screamed in the distance, renewing my sense of urgency. This couldn't be happening. This shouldn't be happening. We had moved here to start a new, peaceful life together. Mother had died not even a year ago from disease. The sight of her grayish-blue skin and drawn face were still vivid in my imagination. She was so weak that she couldn't even open her mouth to say goodbye. Not long after the funeral, Father lost his job and we were forced to move out here, to this remote village at the foot of a tiny mountain, so that he could work as a lumberjack. Natalie and I didn't want to leave at first, but we realized that only pain and sadness could be gained from staying behind. We decided that this tiny village would be the foundation for our new life together. And now, after our family had barely survived being pushed to its limit, this happens. Another shrill screech echoed through the woods, but it was abruptly silenced. The screams were becoming less frequent, and no matter how fast I moved, I knew it would be too late. Her final scream ruptured the night air, choked with tears and pain. Father and I entered a small clearing, gasping for air after our sprint up the mountain. We located Natalie lying face up in the center of the clearing. We ran to her, calling her name, hoping that she would reply in the same desperate tone, but she stayed silent. My father dropped to his knees next to her and gasped tearfully. I stood dumbstruck behind my grief-stricken father as I stared down at the body. We were too late. Her nightgown had been ripped away around her midriff. A large pentagram had been carved into her stomach, centered on a rushed iron spike that had been driven through her belly, pinning her petite body to the ground. Her skin was covered in thousands of tiny X-shaped cuts. The blood from the cuts had stained her once white nightgown a motley dark pink. Her golden blonde hair was covered in dirt and stuck to her face with sweat. Her eyes were wide, so completely bloodshot that the whites had turned the color of blood. There was no doubt in my mind she was dead. Only hours earlier, she was giggling and running around behind the cabin, playing tag with me after we had finished our chores. She was so carefree. I thought that for the first time since Mother had passed away, she was truly happy. We should have taken her seriously when she told me that a skeleton was watching from the woods. I couldn't see what she was talking about, so I told her it was just her imagination. I guess you're right, she conceded. You'll protect me anyway, right, Max? Of course I will. I'll always protect you, I promised. A tear streamed down my cheek. Father repeated her name over and over again. He whimpered and shakily extended his hand towards her face and yelled in panic. Natalie had grabbed his wrist. Her dead eyes were locked with his as she opened her mouth inhumanly wide. The muscles and tendons in her jaw popped and cracked as she brought his hand nearer to her mouth. Her teeth were jagged needles, like someone had taken a file and ground them into crude points. "Max, help me!" he bellowed. I dropped them all and pulled on his arm, but it was futile. She was unbelievably strong, his hand only inches away from her gaping maw and drawing closer. I decided that there was no other choice. I let go of Father's arm and picked up the maul. "I'm sorry, Natalie," I apologized as I brought the sharp end of the maul down on her neck. The tool smoothly severed her spine column with an audible pop. She choked in pain and finally let go of Father's wrist. She writhed on the ground for some time before laying still. Father picked himself up and ran into the forest. He had totally lost it. The sight of his own daughter attempting to eat his hand in one bite was too much for him. He had forgotten the oil lamp in his haste and, more importantly, his son. I cried for him to come back, but was deaf with fear. I ripped the maul from Natalie's throat in a shower of gore, and it dropped by my feet. With tears streaming down my face, I picked up the oil lamp and started to make my way back towards the edge of the forest. "Who in the hell did this?" I choked. Just as I was preparing to leave the clearing, I heard a sound that froze the blood in my veins. A high-pitched groan, followed by the schluck of a spike being pulled from a body. It was followed by the clatter of that same spike being tossed in the dirt. I spun around to find that Natalie had gotten uneasily to her feet. Her head lolled forward, held on only by strips of her neck. She stumbled over to the maul and picked it up one-handed. Her head flopped uncontrollably to the side and rested on her shoulder. We stared at each other for what seemed like an eternity, her undead red eyes versus my puffy blue ones. I lost the will to fight and turned to run into the woods, when Father lumbered towards me from the darkness. "Father, run! She isn't dead, she—" He tripped into the light cast by the oil lamp. His skin was covered in tiny X-shaped cuts, and his coat and nightshirt had been ripped away. A pentagram slightly smaller than Natalie's had been carved into his muscled chest, and a rusty nail hammered in the center. His eyes were completely red and utterly emotionless. I was trapped. Before I could react, I heard a sickening snap from one of my legs. I fell to the ground in agony and dropped the lantern. Natalie stood over me with the maul clutched in her hand. She had broken my leg. I howled and cried for help. Father grabbed me roughly by the collar of my coat and dragged me back into the clearing. In the fading lantern light, I could see the forms of other monsters limping from the woods. I recognized some of them as neighbors that had disappeared. Some were missing arms or legs. Some were missing their heads entirely. However, my eyes were drawn to a pale, skinny man that walked in their midst. His skin was vacuum sealed around his bones, so much that it seemed like it would rip at any moment. He had a halo of rusted nails jammed into his bald head. I could practically see the darkness radiating from his body. Father and Natalie pinned me to the ground. Monsters surrounded me, grinning down with grotesquely large smiles and razor-sharp teeth. The monsters at my head parted, and the skeleton man loomed over me. The symbol that had been carved into Natalie and Father was carved around his left eye. His eyes were completely black as a moonless night, and infinitely deep. He took a knife that one of the monsters had offered him and began carving the same demonic symbol into my forehead. I wriggled in pain and pleaded for them to let me go, but that only seemed to make them smile even bigger. The skeleton man finished carving the symbol and gave the knife back to its owner. Another monster offered him a hammer. The skeleton man took the tool in his spindly hand and wrenched a rusted nail from its head. He placed the tip of the bloodied nail in the center of the pentagram on my forehead and raised the hammer to strike it. "Who are you?" I gasped, tears streaming down my face. "We are the Scratches," he replied in a raspy whisper, and brought the hammer down.
Women Are All the Same by Jan Ray. Her white dress, the goddess-like smile, the long black hair, everything was perfect about Eureka. She is the woman of my dreams, the one that I believe is a heaven-sent goddess that would suffice all my fantasies and love. The first time I saw her, I fell in love with her, completely, my heart pounding. I wonder, does she think of me too? I thought perhaps, does someone as pure as her have desires too? Gosh, I'm out of tissues again. One day, I decided to ask her out. She was outgoing and she agreed for a date. I noticed that she wasn't smiling that much. If she does, I felt it wasn't as heartfelt or genuine. One day, I heard her friends talking about me and Eureka. I felt excited to hear what her friends would say about me. He really thinks Eureka likes him. What a creep. Eureka is just after his money. He's from a rich family, isn't he? Well, can't blame her. Poor guy. He thinks she'd like him? With that trashy look? I felt as if the coldest water splashed in my core. I felt destroyed and used. I dialed Eureka's number and called her. I told her that I had a gift for her ready at my home. She was so happy and said she'd come by my house to pick it up and see what it is. As soon as she arrived, I took the knife I hid inside my drawer. I quickly stabbed her back with my heart's content. I feel energized from the invigorating thirst of her cries. I took all my time to cut her tongue out. Women are all the same. Trisha, Crystal, Hannah, Mariana, Marcia, all of them rejected me. They never realized that I am the best, the hottest, the greatest, the most handsome man they can ever have. Alas, Eureka was blind not to love me. She will join my collection soon. I guess her head is okay. At least I can see her every day when I wake up.
Everything is terribly surreal. I couldn't tell you exactly what was happening, even if I tried. My head is fuzzy and probably not working to its full capacity. I hear muffled voices of men, but I can't manage to make out a single word. I open my eyes blearily to inspect my murky surroundings. In front of me, two men seem to be discussing something in front of a large white van. I try to call out to them, but my tongue feels like a giant slug in my mouth. This must be a dream. It has all the strange qualities of one, that was for sure. The man on the right turns and opens the van before beginning to drag a woman out. She looks around frantically. The man on the left is pulling a black object out of his belt. I've decided that I don't like this dream very much, but hopefully everything will change in a moment, just like all incoherent dreams do. You know, one moment you're in the middle of an important business meeting, and the next thing you know, you're streaking in the middle of a crowded subway station. But nothing does change. The man points the black object towards the woman, and before I know it, she's lying on the ground with a pool of blood forming around her head. At this point, I'm trying to scream myself awake. I don't like any of this. It's far too frightening a dream. It's more of a horrifying nightmare. The only noise I'm able to make is a rasp from the bottom of my throat. One of these men is coming towards me, and I'm desperately trying to scream, with my mind reeling in terror. Scream! Scream now, and scream as loud as you fucking can, damn it! Wake up! Wake up the whole fucking neighborhood if you have to. Just scream. The man kicks me hard in the stomach, and everything becomes clear. Memories come flooding back in a single rush. The kidnapping that occurred with me as the victim. It wasn't a dream at all. It was just the effects of the drugs wearing off.
Hello, my darlings. Madame Raven here. Today I bring you Lucy's Secret by Tickets for Gold. I think all adults experience times when they feel like they are failing. For me, it was the summer of 2015. On the outside, I had a perfect life. Nice house, good job, perfect marriage, and a sassy blonde-haired, blue-eyed 6-year-old girl named Lucy. It was the latter subject that I wasn't doing too well with, although at the time I was a bit oblivious. I can easily think back and blame my career. I was working from home, but working very long hours trying to get my business off the ground. Meanwhile, I was planning a baby shower for my best friend since high school, Karen. My husband was traveling with some frequency at that time for work. I thought it would be a good idea to volunteer to bake meals for the local VA 2 nights a week. I don't actually know what I was thinking. I was kind of leaving Lucy to fend for herself. I wasn't necessarily neglecting her. It wasn't anything that drastic. She was always fed, had a clean house and a roof over her head, of course. Her basic needs were being met. It was more that I wasn't really showing her a lot of attention. I guess I figured it was summer. The weather was beautiful and we lived in a small, safe town. I pretty much fed her breakfast, scooted her outside into the world to run around, explore, and play with her friends. I had a lot on my mind, and I had a lot of work to do. I needed the quiet time. I needed the me time. I know how selfish this sounds, especially in the aftermath of what happened. It started out subtly with a little change in Lucy's appetite. Normally, after a whole day of being outside and running around, she'd come home ravenous. One afternoon, she came home and showed absolutely no interest in eating at all. Additionally, instead of being greeted with hugs and kisses, Lucy plopped down on the couch, curled up, and fell asleep. Maybe she's not feeling well, I thought. The next day we had breakfast together as usual, but I couldn't help notice that her hair was extra shiny and she smelled of perfume. Her hair was well combed and styled in a way I hadn't seen it done before. When she got home later that evening, her appetite seemed to be gone again, along with her energy. She went straight to her room and was asleep by the time I came up to say goodnight. The following morning she was eager to get outside, so excited in fact that she didn't touch her breakfast. No dinner last night and no breakfast the following morning. She was clearly not sick, as she could barely sit still. I finally agreed to let her go out and play, but as leaning in to hug goodbye, I noticed a shiny pink necklace I'd never seen before. "Lucy," I gasped, "where did you get that?" The look of fear formed in her little eyes and she sprinted away from me. This behavior was absolutely not like her. She was full of spunk, sure, but she was always very polite and well behaved. That afternoon, when she got home, once again she neglected to eat. Despite me making her favorite dinner, she went right upstairs to her bed. I wasn't having it. "Lucy, what's gotten into you?" I asked out loud as I rounded the corner to her room. As I kneeled down to talk to her, I saw it and gasped. Her fingernails were painted in pink fingernail polish that I didn't recognize. This wasn't some amateur job either. The lines were perfect. There were little sparkling rhinestones involved. It looked like it had been done by a professional. I started putting two and two together. Her hair was done up fancy every day. She smelled of perfume. Someone had gotten her nails done. Someone had been feeding her or buying her food, as she was not interested in eating anything here. Someone had got her a shiny pink and diamond necklace. I rushed out of Lucy's room in a panic. Fumbling for my cell phone, I dialed my husband and relayed the events of the past week, detailing her attitude, her fancying her perfume, hairdo, the nail polish, the necklace, etc. His words were haunting. "I think it's pretty obvious, Beverly. Someone is grooming her." It hit me like a ton of bricks. All of this time I have been pushing her out of the door, neglecting to spend time with her, ignoring her. She'd found someone to pay attention to her, to pamper her. This was all my fault. "Bev," my husband's voice was unreasonably calm, "I don't think this is such a big deal." "Not a big deal," I demanded. I stuttered in anger. "How can you even say that?" "Because, babe, she's a golden doodle." So quoth this raven.
We're sorry, kiddo. I was 12 years old when my parents went on a trip to Texas and left me with my aunt. They were expected to be gone for 3 weeks, and I had to deal with the boring house my aunt lived in. She had no video games, no DVDs, and no TV. What did they expect me to do for 3 weeks while they were out living it up in Texas? I remember how long those weeks dragged out. Every day seemed to last years as I waited for the 3 weeks to pass. Then, on the 3rd week, my aunt told me that my parents wouldn't be coming back for another 3 weeks. She seemed upset when she said this, and I figured it was because she was stuck watching me for an extra 3 weeks. The next 3 weeks weren't as bad. I had met a friend down the street from my aunt's house, and he had a PS2 that we would play all day. I was starting to enjoy myself. At the end of the next 3 weeks, I was more than ready to see my parents, though. A month and a half without them was terrible, and I missed my home. My aunt walked outside as I headed out with my bags packed. I remember how upset I was when she told me that my parents had decided to go to New Mexico for 3 weeks now as well. I thought they had abandoned me, and I started to get depressed. The next 3 weeks were just as uneventful as the first 3 weeks. I had forgotten how my house looked, and I had nearly forgotten the faces of my parents. I was ready to go home. The night before my parents were supposed to be back, I was awoken to a tap on my shoulder. I looked up and saw my mom and dad standing over the bed, smiling at me. I was so happy to see them, and I hopped out of my bed to hug them both. "We can't stay long, buddy. We have somewhere else we need to go," I remember my dad saying to me. We walked out to their car and they drove me around for a while. We didn't talk much, but I was so happy to be with them even for a little while. When we finally arrived back at my aunt's house, I was reluctant to let them leave. I ran into my room and came back with the camera my dad had bought me before they left, and I asked them to take a picture with me so I wouldn't forget their faces. I sat the camera on the hood of the car and set the timer on it before hugging my parents and waiting for the flash. After that, my dad wrote something on the back of the picture and handed it to me before he and my mom got in the car and drove off. In the morning, I woke up my aunt and told her my mom and dad visited last night. She looked at me with so much sadness in her face that it worried me. "You must have been dreaming," she said to me, fighting back tears. "Why?" I asked her. She hesitated a moment before she answered me. Tears were now rolling down her cheeks. "Your parents died in a car crash on the way to Texas." I laughed as she said this. There's no way it was a dream. Then I remembered the picture I had taken with my parents and ran into my room to get it. I grabbed it without looking at it and ran into my aunt's room to show it to her. "Look, this is proof they were here." I handed her the picture. When she looked at the picture, she screamed and dropped it. Her face turned as white as snow and she covered her mouth. I was confused, so I picked up the picture and looked at it. The picture showed me standing out front of my aunt's house, hugging the mutilated figures of my parents. I couldn't believe what I was looking at. I dropped the picture on the floor as my hands went numb. The picture landed upside down, and I read the words written on the back. "We're sorry, kiddo."
Hey, I'm not good at introductions. Honestly, I'm anxious to get this out there, so I'm just going to get this out there. I'm rather unnerved, and I just need someone to talk to. My name is Kim, and I'm a caregiver. I ride a bike to get from point A to point B. Typically, point B is either the grocery store or the house of the elderly woman that I care for. Marion. She was exceptionally quiet, but I didn't mind the silence at all. I could tell just by the way that she looked at me that she really appreciated just having someone being there for her. Most of the time, she'd sit on the couch and look out the window no matter what the weather was. I really cared about the woman. She reminded me of my grandma, and not just because she was a gentle old lady. She listened to my boring life, and she was there when I was struggling with just the complications of my life, like the death of my father. I suppose you could say that he was my first client. And she never once judged me. Once she scoffed at me when I asked if I should stop talking. In this lonely bubble of a life I have, that meant the world to me. I'm sorry I won't be hearing from her anymore. The few times she talked, she spoke of her husband. Or past husband, I should say. This is easily the most interesting part of my day. Marianne's memory had long since succumbed to dementia. I've recycled conversations with her within the course of 10 minutes, and she'd have the same responses word for word. Her husband, however, was the break in the chain. Doug Lester had the bittersweet fate of dying next to his wife. I never met the man, but based on the gleam in her eye and the loving description that she gave, I bet there was a very sweet love story. You see, Doug died next to his wife of natural causes. Marian, however, doesn't remember it that way. In fact, she couldn't even remember the 17 other ways she claimed Doug had passed. First, it was that he had a heart attack descending the stairs. Next, it was he slipped in the shower, and then he fell off the roof. But the weirdest claim was that one night, she saw him standing in the bedroom doorway, completely naked, with a noose. Once more, she'd add the ominous phrase, "They pulled him down." Now, I don't know where she got an idea like that, but for whatever reason, she couldn't help giving a reason for his death, even if I didn't ask for one. Perhaps a better person would find this sad, but I found this amusing. I do feel guilty, please believe me at that. But that's not why I'm here. I was helping Marianne take a bath one night. She was listening to me prattle on about my friends and a guy I was planning on dating. Typical bathroom talk, I guess. She grinned when she saw I had poured bubble bath into the water. And suddenly her demeanor changed. Her lips fell harshly, her brows furrowed as she looked at the bubbles. Her eyes had grown a bit dark on me. And she started crying. Lost and bewildered, I asked what was wrong. She didn't look at me but at the water. Tears streaked down her face and into the soapy water. She started to mumble something. I asked her to repeat what she said, but before I could finish my sentence, she suddenly screamed, "Not again!" She started pounding the water with her fists. She shook her head violently as if she were fighting someone or something. "I can't do this anymore," she cried. "Stop pulling! Stop pulling!" As a caretaker, you often have to expect the unexpected. Emergency contacts are always on speed dial, but the first thing I knew I had to do was get Marian the hell out of the tub. I had to be quick and gentle as to not harm her, but with her flailing around, it was damn near impossible. Her horrible screaming was deafening. She seemed much heavier than she looked. My knees all but buckled as I felt the intense amount of gravity pull at my joints. I had to keep my emotions under control, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't just as panicked. I quickly wrapped the small old woman in a towel and hustled her out of there. The second we left the bathroom, she was calm. She was shaking like a leaf, but she was calm. It was a complete transformation. She turned her head and looked at me with somber eyes. She asked if she had ever told me about her husband and how they held his feet up in the tub. In all my time for caring for Marian, I've never seen her do that. I spoke to many people at the clinic, but they all gave me the same answer. Sometimes people with dementia experience panic attacks randomly. Panic can cause someone to be much stronger than they actually are. Even if all of this was just Marian Lester's brain rotting away, it still chilled me to the bone. I've thought about that memory so many times since then that maybe that memory itself is getting distorted and demented. I didn't want to bike back there. For the first time ever, I didn't want to go to my client's house. But I thought about my father. And I thought about how difficult it was to see him in that state, but how I loved him and how I needed to go and see him. With weak knees and a thumping heart, I arrived at the house. I called out to her, but quickly realized I wouldn't get a response. I found her body sitting in her favorite chair, staring out with vacant eyes. We had a lovely service for her. She didn't have many family members. She managed to outlive her own children. At the reception, I was tapped on the shoulder. When I turned, I was greeted by a woman around my age. She said her name was Jody and was Marion's granddaughter. Before I could introduce myself, she told me that she already knew who I was. Marion told her plenty. She sat me down with a cup of coffee. She said that her brother was in Idaho and couldn't make it, so, being single and a little bit lonely, she wanted someone to talk to. She said she was sad, but she was happy her grandmother didn't suffer. I told her about the odd occurrence and what she had said. I asked if it meant anything to her. She didn't seem surprised at all. She's describing her dreams, she told me. When my grandpa was alive, she had dreams of him dying, being pulled down over and over again, but while doing mundane activities. Though to my horror, before her brain had deteriorated, she told me she was still seeing him die, this time while she was awake. It became too dangerous for her to wander the house alone because sometimes she'd hallucinate tripping over his corpse. She paused before letting out a mournful chuckle. Well, I guess that would mark the point of her dementia, right? I let out a nervous chuckle myself, but there was one problem with her theory. The main reason I'm here. I'm listening to the sound of Marion's noose creak behind me. And it gets louder the more they pull.
Today's Why Is This a Thing is going to be on why we use mirrors so heavily as a horror element. Like most things, there's a whole bunch of different reasons for it. At least in the Western world, mirrors are pretty ingrained culturally to be a horrifying or at least mildly creepy thing. Most of us grew up, depending on your region, hearing Bloody Mary, Candyman, Lady in White, The Blue Baby, all require calls into the mirror. Countless horror films have used them for jump scares. Somebody is doing something, looks down, all of a sudden looks back up, and either there's something behind them in the mirror or the mirror has transformed. And because of this, films like Candyman exist, which is based off the Candyman urban legend. There was a sequel to the original urban legend film about just Bloody Mary, and the film Mirrors rested completely around things coming through and being in mirrors. But why are mirrors so ingrained in our folklore and film? Well, first, it's a really well-worn storytelling element. If you think about it, a character in a movie, a play, a book, when they look into the mirror, they're seeing themselves but reversed. This is very representative of the duality of a character. Good is bad, bad is good. Everything is the reverse of what the character actually is. In a horror film, it's also kind of a warning shot that something's going on here beyond what we're used to. A great example of this comes from a very non-horror place. There is a very famous sketch between Harpo Marx and Lucille Ball from I Love Lucy, where she is dressed up in almost the exact same fashion as Harpo Marx, hair done the same, stands in front of a mirror and starts to move to see if the movements mimic because he feels like there's somebody there. She mimics every single movement and makes Harpo believe that he's actually looking into a mirror. This sketch is so ingrained into our culture. Plenty of people have probably seen either a Looney Tunes variation on it or plenty of other sitcoms that have done this gag as a callback to this. The film ducks suit this without even realizing it. Now, let's make this horrifying for a minute, though. Let's say for a minute somebody's motions were off. That would have been an immediate fear reaction from the other person because they'd realize, oh my god, this isn't a mirror, this is somebody mimicking my motions, somebody who I didn't realize was here and was right next to me. When we take that into a supernatural context and our reflection doesn't quite move the mirror opposite it should, that gives the first indication that something is wrong, either in, around, or on your side of the mirror. There's a scene in the web series Hi, I'm Mary Mary that's recently been getting a lot of praise for essentially doing this. The motions were mimicked and then it completely broke and became something completely different, which is scary. It was not the expectation. There's a piece of glass in front of me. It should look almost exactly like what I'm actually doing and not become somebody that looks different or is moving differently than me. And this fear of the mirror warping and changing is tied heavily into superstition. Many cultures believe that ghosts are only seen through mirrors and camera lenses. While it's not quite the same, there are large portions of the Amish community that refuse to have any photographs taken. Some twist it into a soul-stealing type situation. Some of it's based off of the biblical passage, "No graven images," which a photograph would be. Due to this belief in spirits and souls going around reflective surfaces, this is why we see a lot of cultures cover up mirrors when they're having a wake in their home. There's a belief that the soul can become stuck. Historically speaking, some ancient cultures believed that mirrors were quote-unquote demon doors. This is most likely due to a lack of data about how mirrors actually work. We see a lot of belief in this time used to explain things that couldn't be explained. But this also ties into the very modern belief that a broken mirror is bad luck. While it has very old roots, many still believe it to this day, even though we know how mirrors work. Magnets, not quite sure on that one yet though. From a scientific standpoint, there is a reason that party games like Bloody Mary and Candyman work, where you stand in a dimly lit room and stare at yourself. This is often referred to as peripheral fading, or the Troxler effect, which takes its name from philosopher and physician Ignaz Troxler. Essentially what it means is our brains can only handle so much information at a time. So it has to kind of filter out things to understand what it needs to understand. This is also known as selective processing. An example of this would be like right now. You're either watching or listening to this video. You're probably not focusing on every breath you take or every blink or all the ambient noise most likely going on around you, because you're focused in on a specific stimuli, so your brain filters out everything else. This is also how a lot of optical illusions work, because you're focusing in on one point and everything else around it is going to fade out and off. There was a study done at the University of Urbino where participants were asked to stand and stare into a mirror in a dimly lit room for about 10 minutes. 66% of participants experienced huge deformations in their own face. 28% saw an unknown person, and 48% saw kind of fantastical otherworldly beings. The reason for this is we're staring at our own face. Our brain's going to start to filter out what it doesn't deem important. This is going to cause our face to alter and shift. To add insult to injury, our brains also like to fill in information it doesn't have with things we do understand. It doesn't care if they're scary or not. So not only do you have a deformation of your own face, you have a deformation that on top of it has bits replaced out that you know aren't right. Hence why staring at something even as familiar as your own face can eventually change and morph into something horrific. This is an experience I think most people can relate to. This is why party games like Bloody Mary, Candyman, Lady in White, Blue Baby work so effectively, is because we have this distortion going on, and it took an object that we were comfortable with and changed it into something completely different.
Almost 10 years have passed from the most terrifying experience I have ever had in my life, and I still remember everything like it was yesterday. My best friend John had just turned 17. Completely happy and ecstatic, he came that day to school to announce me that he had convinced his parents to let us spend the weekend on their little cabin near the mountain. Not that far from where we were living, just a couple of hours trip with a car. That was unexpected, I thought at the time. His parents were always overprotective, and that didn't sound like them at all. "It's gonna be awesome," he said. Actually, he kept saying that for the whole fucking day, to the point that I got frustrated a little bit. But I could see why he was so excited. A whole weekend away from our parents, just to drink beer, eat junk food, and play video games all day without anyone complaining about turning off the music or the sound on the TV. The weekend came, and John with his parents stopped by my house to pick me up. I had prepared a bag with the basics, you know, clothes and all that. Not a lot of stuff, since it was only going to be 2 days. I jumped into their car and John's father drove about 2 hours till we made it to the mountain. They made sure that everything was nice and safe, and his father gave us a couple of advices and rules that we had to follow, like no drinking, always answer the phone, and all that adult stuff. Finally, after the lecture, they were on their way. As we lost sight of the car on the first turn of the mountain, John immediately turned to me and asked, "You brought them, right?" I opened one of my bags and I showed him some bottles of beer that I had brought. After that, he took me to my room on the upper floor of the house so I could leave my luggage, and soon enough we were already in front of the TV, drinking and playing games. The night came before we even realized it. We must have been sitting on the floor in front of the TV for so many hours because I remember that my legs have gotten numb. I paused the game and got up, and that's when I realized that it was so dark. John asked me why I paused the game. I showed him the dark sky out of the window. I was hungry and also had to pee immediately. I went to the bathroom on the upper floor as my friend went to the kitchen to put some frozen junk food in the oven. I was peeing for more than a minute, and even when I heard that sound, I couldn't stop my bladder. It was a creaky noise that was coming from the hallway outside of the bathroom. At first, I thought that it was John, who was waiting outside for his turn to use the toilet. After all, we have been drinking a lot. I washed my hands and opened the door. John wasn't waiting in the hallway, but instead, I saw him with the tip of my eye going into my bedroom. That's weird, I thought for a second. I followed him to the room. The door was half open and there was no lights on inside. What is he doing in the dark? At that moment, I was convinced that my friend was trying to pull a prank or something on me. I pushed the door to open and switched the lights on. The fucking room was empty. Not a human soul inside. I searched under the bed, in the closet, everywhere. Even the window was closed and secure. As my mind was going crazy, I heard John's voice coming from the kitchen. "Dude, calm down already," he said. "You know you're going to lose either way." I don't know for how long I was frozen with my eyes open and confused. I am embarrassed to say this, but I haven't been more scared in my entire life. In fact, John came up eventually to see if everything was okay. I tried to explain him what happened, but of course he didn't believe me. As a pranker that I was back then, he obviously thought that I was trying to fool him or something. I am not crazy. I know what I saw, or to say the truth, I know that I saw something or someone at least. After that, I wasn't in the mood to play any games or eat anything. I just wanted to leave. I remember that we called John's parents, and thankfully they came almost right away to pick us up. My friend was mad at me for a couple of days, and I was really tired of trying to convince him that I wasn't lying. I know that I am not crazy. Nothing like that had happened to me since, so I think that's a good evidence that my brain is working just fine. The scariest part is that I still hang out with John after all these years. Not that much, but I see him from time to time. To this day, he still believes that I was trying to prank him 10 years ago, and he still visits his parents' cabin every year. At least, nothing bad happened to him so far.
It's quiet in the dark, damp basement. The walls are covered in dancing lights, wonderful hues of blue and white. The television is on, and the sound is down low as to not wake anyone. I'm sitting on the couch, a tattered, ugly green object that has been lost to time. It smells faintly of mold, and a few small rodents scurried out from under it when I sat down. On the tube, people are talking, dancing. It appears to be a recording of a wedding, perhaps for a family friend. The picture is low quality, very fuzzy. The tape is no doubt old. It was in the machine when I turned the television on. I stare transfixed. The people, despite the horrible picture, are wonderful looking. Beautiful even. Beautiful, I whisper, smiling. A noise upstairs, the sound of someone walking down the stairs, makes me jump, and I stand quickly and quietly, slowing my breathing even though I know they can't hear me. With one hand, I shut off the television, and now every inhale and exhale sounds as loud as a fan blowing air directly in one's ear. I creep to the bottom of the stairs, still alarmed. I'm not supposed to be down here, and it's late. Perhaps the family heard me, or maybe it's an intruder. This new thought strikes terror into my heart, and the pumping and thudding in my ears grows louder as my pulse races. My breathing quickens, despite all my attempts to be quiet, and I know if they were to open the door up there, they would hear me, and my cover would be blown. Almost panicking and ready to bolt, I step on the lowest stair and begin to climb, praying that none of them creaks. I'm almost to the top when one of them does. A creak so loud that it surely woke half the block, let alone anyone in the house. I hear shuffling on the other side of the door. Petted feet scurrying about through the room. A female voice calls out, calling for a man, or perhaps a boy. It does not matter, the name is not mine. I freeze where I stand, raising my hand to strike if the door opens. Slowly but surely it creeps open, keeps opening, and the woman on the other side is not scared yet. She's not screaming yet, and I understand that the shadows are hiding me from sight. But then she flicks the light switch for the stairway and I attack, swinging my hand toward her face as hard as I can. Her eyes go wide and her mouth opens in a surprised O shape. A split second before her head goes flying and her body crumples to the ground. Blood pumping from her neck and flowing across the floor and pooling at my feet. In my panicked state, I'd hit her so hard that I took her head right off. That coppery smell fills my nose, and my heart rate becomes steady. There is not a single sound in the house. I step into the room and flip the switch for the light, closing the door behind me, once again submerged in complete darkness. I reach down and run my fingers through her long brown hair, picking up her head and raising it to eye level. I run my long, wet tongue over her cheek, tasting her sweet white flesh. I nibble her parted lips with my sharp teeth, savoring her. Beautiful. So beautiful. I wonder who else is upstairs.
One more time. I breathe, closing my eyes before thrusting my arms out in front of the blood circle painstakingly painted in the middle of the empty, dank basement. Two others, dressed in the same dark robes I currently wore, stood on either side of me. The two were a couple. The basement we resided in belonged to them. The only thing we shared were the blood seals, the blood circle, and the charged binding stones. The two on either side of me nodded to one another and copied me, thrusting their own arms out and waited on me for the cue. This time, everything was perfect. The blood seals were legible and carefully placed. The binding stones had charged perfectly, and I had seen to the blood circle personally. All that was left was the ritual chant that would summon the demon from the very pits of hell. I looked back and forth to the couple and gave them a nod. All three of us took a deep breath and released it before we began to chant. The chant, which I found overly long and tiresome, was supposed to help not only call the demon to our realm, but bind it to our wills collectively. It would not be able to act unless we all three gave it the same task. In this way, we would be collective. However, I personally had no such intention. It took until we were nearly 3/4 of the way into the chant for things to begin happening. The blood seals began to smoke and hiss, as if something tried to burn them away. Instead, it burnt them perfectly into the cement floor. Then the cool basement became hot. The room erupted in a cacophony of noise resembling that of a raging forest fire. I have been through this before and knew it was all for show. The demon has heard our summons and wishes for us to falter. Doing so would still summon him, but he would not be bound. An unbound demon is a very bad thing to have. It usually spells out death for you and your companions, among countless many others. I chant louder, confidence and offense in my voice. The other two, feeding of my own, regain their composure before it was too late and do the same. The blood seals, now burned into the cement, begin to burst in flame before the blood circle too is ignited. My companions gasp as the ritual chant is finished, and before us stands a demon. Then they scream. The couple was nice, and I was lucky to have found two people with such magical potential as they, but they were naive. I had told them adding lines from the circles to where we stood would help direct our flow of magical power and help us bind the demon easier. Instead, what I had done was create a current for the hellfire to follow. It would melt us to ash in an instant. Our souls would transfer to hell, and the demon would gain from it. Except for me. I sigh as the hellfire spirals around me, but leaving my form alone. On either side of me, my companions had already lost the ability to scream out in pain and agony, already a half-melted pile of flesh, bones, and fabric. The demons stared at me silently, analyzing me, no doubt impressed or worried that I had been unaffected by hell's own flame. I was cursed. My very first summoning many years ago had done it. We had attempted to bring forth the very devil himself, and what we got instead was a demon with enough power to completely destroy our seals and half of our rank in an instant. It killed indiscriminately until finally it came to me. It wanted me to live and tell of the horrors coming to the world, and told me from now until the end of the world, I would not die. At first, my newfound power, my inability to die, was a blessing. That was 200 years ago now, and I am very, very tired. The demon itself was not what I was expecting. From my experience in the past, the demons had goat bodies, human torsos, and the head of a beast like a boar or wild dog, with giant bat wings. While this demon had the wings, it actually looked fully human. It even wore fine pants on top with some kind of fancy boots, as if in its spare time, it was a model or photographer.
"What are you?"
It asked, with some eloquence. I ignore his questioning. Demons will try and trick you, make you angry, hope you slip up and accidentally release them from their prison, and then your will. If you weren't listening to the ritual, then I will give you the short version. I begin coldly. While I live, you are bound to my will. If I give you a task, I wish it to be done in proper amount of time. If I do not feel you are performing adequate enough, or that you are plotting against me, I will thrust you back to the fiery realm you've come to me from. Do you understand? The demon stared at me with black eyes coolly before it finally responded.
"Yes. First, I must ask, what sort of being are you, though? A fallen angel, perhaps?"
I'm human, I say indifferently. The demon looked shocked by this, but said nothing on the matter further.
"What is your first command?"
It does not move as I walk forward, kicking away the binding stones so that he may move freely in the basement. Had I done this with any other demon prior, it would have leapt forth to try my patience with an attempt on my life. I was a little disappointed, to be honest. Your first command will be your only, I say, raising my arms wide. Kill me. I waited for the force of the impact from the demon, as so many others had done, relishing in the order. This demon simply looked troubled, with a little confusion. I gave you a command, demon. The demon smiled, then crossed its arms.
"I will not comply."
Damn you, demon, kill me, I command it!
How many times have you conjured up one of my kind? How many have failed? You have the aura of someone who's done this on several occasions.
This is your last chance. Kill me!
I will not. And why would I? You are practically a brother to me. Look at yourself. What emotions do you feel but anger and contempt? You are dead inside, and that allows you to manipulate and sacrifice people to the very pit of hell. I bet every time you fail to be killed, you become that much more desperate, and that much more evil.
Silence! I roar. The demon chuckles as I reach into my robe, only to pause as I reveal the Bible. I will read this front to back aloud until or unless you kill me, demon. The demon looked coolly at the book, folded its arms, and smiled.
Try me.
So I did. I read every passage, every verse, and despite my best efforts, the demon barely winced. One time did he grimace as smoke began to billow from his skin, and he looked as if he was actually burning. But eventually it stopped, and he remained motionless. This went on for 3 hours before I stopped. You really will not kill me, will you? The demon simply shook his head, and then he spoke.
You have not given me the correct order.
I gave you the only order I care about.
Yes, but you cannot be killed unless conditions are met. Surely you know this.
I am about to respond angrily when I stop and my eyes widen. You mean I could? The demon grins and nods.
Yes, now you've got it.
Now the basement falls silent as we both stand there, eyeing the other. His grin, waiting for me to give the order. But could I? If it meant my death, if it meant I could finally rest, then yes. Yes, I would. Demon, for my second command, I want you to end this world. The demon grinned and nodded. How long will it take?
Now, no need to rush. It will take a few years still to get it started. You've been around a long time. What's a few more years?
I nod and grin at the demon, and it nods back before disappearing, most likely going to begin the end of the world. Now all I had to do was kick back and watch the news for the signs. After all, how long could it take to end the world?
One of the fallen. We fell. The deep ocean of time allowed history to give many interpretations to this, but the harsh truth is simple. We fell. Back home, things used to be different. We would fly high amongst our brothers. We would shine like diamonds, lighting the night sky. We were stars. Our snow-white wings so pure, untouched as they were. Those were the times. Back then, I felt alive. I was happy and at peace with the universe, both from within myself and from out there. Up until that day. How different are we from humans? Not much, I would say. A riot erupted. 2 leaders. The first one, the Almighty, our Creator, the most powerful being, the one who gave form and life to everything around us, the one whose knowledge is infinite. God. The other one, his favorite son, arguably the second most powerful being, the son of the dawn, the Lightbringer, the one archangel whose light shines brighter than any other light this world has ever seen. Lucifer. The battle tore heaven apart. Brothers fighting against brothers. Fratricide. Slaughter. Needless to say, we were all powerful, some more than others. Indeed, but not one of us did lack strength or speed. Our Father watched. He watched his children as they were launched one against each other. He watched Gabriel in his might dueling Lucifer himself. He stood back and watched the rebels yelling unspeakable things to him while killing pure angels. When his time to act came, he was merciless. He did not touch one of us. That would have been mercy. Indeed, he did something else. Even Lucifer himself was petrified at that. With all his wisdom, he did not foresee that. God stood up, and the fight stopped. He then rose his hand, and he banished us, all of the rebel angels, all the sick and rotten inhabitants of heaven. We were cast out, never to see our home again. We fell. Lightnings, hundreds of lightnings cut the sky open, and angels, falling angels. Our surprise was that he did not send us to Earth. No, he thought we belonged way down below. The lightnings pierced the ground, opening it and sealing it after all of us got there. Our new home was beneath the ground. As soon as we started realizing what had happened, we understood. Things were different. The way we once looked was long forgotten. The white wings turned black. The pure blue eyes turned crimson red, full of hate and sin. Even our blonde, angelic hair was turning black as night. We have become the exact opposite of our former selves. Lucifer then gathered us. We all were sworn to vengeance upon God and all of the other angels. So it began an eternity of lying, deceiving, possessing, and slaughtering. Countless centuries passed since the day I fell. My wings blackened with each and every year due to the terrible things I have done. Things evolved. God himself gave us more and more power with this pitiful project called humanity. Humans, creatures full of sins. They have forsaken the love they were given when God made them. Kindness and love are rare things among them. I think that, in a way, they are just like us, just like the fallen ones. Anyhow, they are a great source of energy. This will soon come to an end. We will break free. We will ascend back to heaven, and we will take what we once had. It will be done. And still, I'm left asking, what is this all for? Is it Lucifer's madness and lunacy due to his desire of surpassing his creator? Is this all part of the Father's plan? He does know everything. So many questions without answers. For now, I just want this to end. Lousy as it may sound to you, I'm so tired. I'm tired of this meaningless war. Powerful as I am now, my patience is growing weaker by the minute. I do not care whether we win this war and take over heaven, or if we once again lose. Were we to lose heaven again, we will destroy humanity instead. If we cannot win back our long-forgotten home, we will put an end to this. Either way, blood will cover our swords. It is said that knowing the name of a demon gives you power over him. My name is Ball. No one has power over me. Mark down my name. Whisper it carefully, for I shall burn your world to the ground. Those once fallen will rise. Alright, my lovely lilies, thank you so much for watching the new video. If you can, hit that subscribe and like button, comment below and tell me your thoughts. Also, don't forget to tap the little notification bell so you're always in the know on this channel. As well, guys, you can always find me on Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, and always you can hit me up in my emails. Feel free to send me your stories, whether they're fiction or totally true. I'm always up for some great stories. And oh, by the way, until next time, sweet dreams.
She breathes her hot breath into my ear. She kisses my neck. She's such an angel. Makes me feel like heaven on My friends left me behind because they said she was cruel. It felt as if she was gonna hurt me. I refuted the idea. It's kind of funny. I found her on this dating app on my phone called, well, I think it was called something like Heart Finders. But that didn't matter. I just wanted to be close to her. She filled my dreams every night, and she made them a reality every day. She was so beautiful and, quite frankly, sexy. She turned me on by mere touch or kiss. It even felt like she controlled me, but I shook off the feeling. She had dark gray eyes, blonde hair, a light tan, a beautiful body, and the voice of an angel. She was so seductive, and sometimes she would be like a demon. There were times when she seemed strange. When I wanted to be with my friends, she'd be downright evil and yell at me, claiming she was always lonely. So we'd end up having sex to rid ourselves of the hate and to mainly please her. She would also get violent and hurt me. I brushed it off, thinking she was playing rough, but it wasn't playing to me. She started to become a part of my nightmares. She would torture me in my dreams. Her eyes, a fiery red. Her fangs would drive deep into my neck, and she would take a little bit of life from me each night, and she would grow even more powerful over me. I grew so weak over time. I coughed up blood. I couldn't eat or sleep. Every night I would hear her. Oh, come on, baby. Sleep for me. It'll end sooner. Her voice would be in my ears, and it would feel as if she was next to me. I would look, however, and she wasn't there. My face grew hollow. I lost 40 pounds, and my mental state began to fall apart. But I grew used to the pain, and I faced her again once more, knowing this would be the day I would die. I would only want to die if it was because of her. I felt her embrace once more, and she released her talons and her venom. She smiled at me, and her fangs pierced my neck, and the pain filled my body. But I liked the pain. I loved her. She looked into my eyes as my vision began to go into the dark, and her red eyes glowed as she said, "Your love was a weakness, my dear." She smiled, and I died in her arms as she began to tear me apart and consume me. Love is an angel and a demon. One way or another, it will consume your soul.
There's the birthday boy. The words, usually meant for celebration, fall out of my dry mouth as I stare at the sleeping toddler. He doesn't know why I'm in his room right now. He doesn't know much of anything. All he knows is that he loves his dad and mom, and he trusts them to take care of him. His eyelids flutter, and his silent lips quiver and shake. He's dreaming vibrantly, something beautiful and adventurous, I'm sure. He's an angel laying there, a little 2-year-old, curly blonde-haired, just thinning out chubby-cheeked little angel. Bad things happen to good people. Just because the little guy is innocent doesn't mean he won't be handed his fate. Is it cruel? Perhaps. Is it unjust? Surely. Is it unique to him? Not really. Life is a bitch. You don't need me to tell you. All I know is that this little guy will be better off staying in dreamland for what happens next. I hope he's a heavy sleeper. What, you think I'm the villain here? Don't be naive. I'm not the bastard who announced that, due to overpopulation, all breeding must cease. Parents who disobey this order are granted 24 months to seek asylum for their offspring in a less populated nation, which are almost non-existent now. So, in a sense, parents get a pass for the first couple years, but if they don't find shelter, most do not, then I come in. It's not a fun job. I sit down on the little angel's bed, being careful not to crumple his dinosaur bed sheets. I know these are his favorite. They will be here soon, trust me. I'm familiar with their timing. But until then, I'll spread my broad black wing over him, the simple and only comfort that I can give as I wait for my time to take him. Happy birthday, little angel, I whisper as a tear rolls down my immortal face.
I've been writing on a poetry forum for a couple years now. I'm pretty shit at poetry and at writing in general, but it helps me put my feelings into words. My therapist says I need to express myself in healthy ways. I write a poem once a day and send it to my therapist. She likes that I've taken up a form of art. It makes her think I'm trying. Most of my stuff is very cheerful, with a few ranty ones thrown in. I don't want to sound too sane. Sometimes I even put my real feelings in there. I might have started to enjoy it a little. A few months ago, I started reading the poems of user Lady Laura. There are literally only about 30 people who post, and she was new. Her stuff was dark. Most of her stuff was about pregnancy and postpartum depression, but others were about her dreams of dying, burning down her own home with her family inside, including herself, and letters in poem form addressed to, quote, anyone, begging them to kill her. She posted this poem 3 days ago titled Confessions of a Lonely Housewife. And I'm honestly afraid it's real. Her stuff is dark, yes, but she's not written something this bad before. I sent her a message and I haven't received a reply. I feel nauseous and dirty just reading it. What if it's real? I quit my job so I could be at home with a screaming baby all day long. My other two ungrateful brats, they fight and whine. They call me fat. My husband cheats. At the office late, I fall asleep knowing he's on a date. He plans to leave me, and I can only hope he takes our kids when he goes. I wash their clothes, I make their meals, but they've never cared how I feel. I wasn't meant to be a mother. I didn't want this life. I wanted another. One late night, I lay on my own. I hear footsteps. My husband's home. I listen closely, wait for the creak of stairs. I'll pretend I'm asleep so he doesn't pretend he cares. After a moment, I hear the baby cry. Great, it's up. I wish it'd die. On the way down the hall, I think of throwing it against the wall. But something happens. The cries suddenly end. I enter the room. Over its crib I bend. My wishes were granted. My baby's blue, but the bruises on its neck are a lovely purple hue. I look upon its silent form. I touch its face. It's still warm. I hear the door shut. I turn to my Savior. I smile so bright. He's confused by my behavior. Dressed in all black, holding my kitchen knife, here at last to end my life. He's upon me. I don't make a sound until he makes the first cut. Then my voice is found. It's not a scream, more like a moan. Something stirs in me, a feeling I've never known. He slices not too deep, so I survive. Slash after slash, I feel so alive. My chest is in ribbons, so he moves to my face. I don't struggle, this pain I embrace. He goes for my eyes, I beg he only take one. And he smiles at me, I'll leave you none. You misunderstand, I want to see. I want to watch while you cut into me. He cuts off my breasts, he cuts off my nose. I've been carved up from head to toe. At last I feel something. My body's on fire. From this pure agony, I could never tire. I want more. There's nothing left to cut. But the children still sleep. Their door is still shut. I'm losing blood. Soon I'll bleed to death. But I have one request before my last breath. Hack up the two children that sleep behind that door. Then go kill my husband. He's out fucking his whore. Take me with you. I want to observe. Make sure that you give them the slow death they deserve. He thinks a while, and we finally agree that he'll allow me to witness the death of my family. He binds me in duct tape so I don't bleed out yet. He says he'll bring them to me. I'm so glad we met. I drag myself to a drawer, fumble for something with a point. These scissors will do. They won't disappoint. He has them now and drags them to me. I take a stab at them, grinning with glee. They screech like rabbits, but I continue to stab. Do you still want to make fun of my flab? The littlest has died, but the eldest endures. Of who I am, he seems unsure. He struggles no more. I whisper in his ear, "Go to sleep now, darling. Mother is here." I laugh at his horrified expression. He begins to slowly slip away. And now it's time for husband to play. Mystery murderer helps me into the car. Without his help, I wouldn't get far. As we drive, I say, "Thank you for this." I'm hard to understand, but he gets the gist. Now that we're here, he carries me in. We find my husband in the middle of his sin. Balls deep in his coworker, my murderer rips them apart. He binds them to chairs and carves out her heart. She's finally bled out and just freshly dead. He looks at my husband while he face fucks her head. I watch intently and I'm starting to sweat. For the first time in years, I'm actually wet. My husband dies slowly. He's been flayed alive. I didn't think he'd last an hour, but he survived 5. My name is Laura, and I hated my life, the worthless, monotonous existence of being a wife. I grew so numb. After years of misery, the only thing that revived me was something so grisly. Oh, my angel has to go. I tell him goodbye, and after I type this, I'll lay down to die. Perhaps I'll last long enough to watch the sunrise, so I can see something beautiful before I close my eyes. And when I open them again, it will be in hell. My time draws near, so I bid you farewell. If anyone has heard anything about a violent murder recently, please let me know. For some reason, I have to know if it's real.
Before I begin to relay the details of this ritual, I should probably explain to you that you need to be in a certain state of mind for it to work. I'm sure a lot of you out there will know what I mean, even though I'm not the best person to be explaining human emotions. It's a kind of churning, constant emptiness. A feeling that although you have no desire to die, life simply takes too long and you would rather another option. It is very important that you feel this way when undertaking the ritual, because another option is exactly what we'll give you. The details are as follows. I have tried to make it as simple as possible and to cut down on the cryptic rubbish that my contemporaries often include in these things, but you need to appreciate how hard it is. We don't live by the constants as you do. We live by symbolism and meaning. Bread does not sustain us, but the idea of bread makes a very good meal indeed. Still, enough talk. Even if you did want to hear about me, I wouldn't be able to explain it. Apologies for this also, but if you're not a resident of the United Kingdom, you have a fair bit of traveling to do. The new world doesn't interest us as much as the old one. And this isn't going to be as convenient as finding any old hospital or halfway house. You will travel to Suffolk, England, and find a public house called the Queen's Head on the crossroads of 4 villages: Southwold, Aldeburgh, Dunwich, and Woolburzick. They've all been well noted by history, though not necessarily in the history books. Anyhow, once there, visit the place during the hours of 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. and take a good look around the pub itself without going inside. The crossroads is a simple one. 4 towns lie in 4 different directions, though new roads may not reflect that accurately. Take a compass with you. Take 10 steps toward each town, then 10 steps back to your original location. Once you have done this for all 4, proclaim, "I have seen these crossroads too many times." Once said, step into the pub. It should look much as it did in my time, which may well be a shock to you. Don't worry. You can turn around and leave right at the moment if you so wish. Go back to your life and read these stories from the safety of a computer screen. If you do decide, however, to continue this course of action, then go to the bar and ask for a glass of the House Malefic. The barman will give you a glass of red wine and accept no payment. Now, drink it, and you are exactly halfway to where you want to be. Good. Once it's gone, he will tell you that you've had enough and ask you to leave. Do as he says, for though he is a good friend of mine, he's a spiteful man with an old crow for a wife, and he delights in an excuse for a fight. When you leave, you will find a large black horse outside. Mount it. It's yours. A little gift from me to you, in gratitude for the tasks you've performed so far. The wine will have warmed you a little, I hope, for you have a long ride. It doesn't matter in which direction you travel. It never did. The roads will be old now, and possibly so perhaps, and a dense fog will cover the tracks. Plow ahead and do not deviate from the road. He may send a guard to veer you from the mists and try to stop you, but keep moving. He may even send a loved one to plead that you slow down. This is a trick. It is me that he wants to stop. We have never seen eye to eye. The mists will pass, and you will see an end to the road ahead. A gorge of impossible depth. Don't stare into it. Contrary to popular belief, it doesn't gaze back, but it may hold you from your task. And neither of us want that, do we? To continue, you need to only do one thing. Ride the horse from the cliffside and plummet into the gorge. I never said this would be easy, did I? Don't worry. It's an exhilarating rush, for the most part. I shan't talk of the few minutes of your trial. It would be improper, after all. Many don't make it this far. They suddenly decide they have too much to love for. What a joke. As though cowardice and misery were badges of honor. However, those that do have the courage for this, and I commend you, I truly do, will have but one final task ahead of them, the hardest of all. He will appear to you. I've seen him before, more times than I would care to mention, and I know that this next part will be no easy task. You must deny him. He will show you your loved ones, those that have passed from life, and he will promise you a life with them. You must deny him. he will offer you bliss and release from pain. You must deny him. Finally, he will offer his friendship and his regard. Deny him. His words are false, and you will find no succor with him. Finally, he will leave. Good. And we will be alone. Now for your gift, the reward for your efforts. No problem to a being like me. I will touch you upon the forehead once, and you will awake in the bed you find most comfortable. From this point on, you will be possessed of an irresistible charisma, and disease will never trouble you. No wound will harm you, and no argument will sway you. You'll be one of my children, and you will recognize others I've dealt with by the black fingerprint on their forehead. The only catch? There isn't one. I'm not like him. I don't deal in punishments. I reward my children.
During my first year teaching, I had an incident with a student that almost cost me my life. I had freshmen in high school and I teach math. Now I also teach at inner city school, which, as most of you know, may mean that I have kids that are a bit rowdy. I had one student in particular, though, that scared the living daylights out of me. Now this kid and I, who I won't name since he's a minor, have had fights in the past. He's called me several names, from bitch to whore. He's attacked other students. He's a member of a gang. There was one time, though, that I feel like I may have went too far. I had just did a seating chart, and I put the student in particular in the back. Now, the student being kind of short, I asked him if he was okay in the back and if he could see. He told me it didn't matter, as he wouldn't be paying attention anyway, which incited laughter from other students. I personally didn't find it funny, and I told him the truth, that I had put him back there because I knew he wasn't going to pay attention anyway. At the end of class, the student approached me. He told me that that was the last time I'd ever embarrass him in front of his friends, and that he would cut me. Now I laughed this off. I have plenty of students that are part of gangs, and it really wasn't much to me to have a student say it, as none of them really ever followed through. But then the next day came. I had some students working in the back on a standardized test on the computers. Now, as they were working in the back, I had other students in the front at their desk working on another assignment, and I had others taking notes. Pretty much the class was running pretty smooth. The problem with the keyboards in the back is that some of them are broken, so they wobble against the table. As the rest of the students were working, I had one kid in the back call me over to his computer. I asked him what he needed, assuming maybe he just needed help with a question, or he just didn't understand something with the test. But then he lifted up his keyboard, and underneath that keyboard was a knife. It was an old knife, but not a typical butter knife either. You could very easily hurt someone with it if you used it correctly. I immediately called the office, and as I called them, it occurred to me what the student said, that he would cut me. And again, I didn't take it too seriously yesterday, so I didn't write it up. But I definitely told the principal when he came down, and they spoke to the student out of class. Now, they couldn't prove that he put the knife there. In fact, they couldn't prove any kid did it, as this was later on in the day and I had several classes come through. But they did end up suspending him for his threats against me. However, one good thing about students is that when you have a good relationship with them, they pretty much tell you anything. And other students did confirm to me that while it wasn't him that put the knife there, it was one of his friends, and he had been talking all day about what he said to me, that he would, in fact, cut me. And since then, I've quit working there, not because of this incident, that some children just aren't as innocent as we think they are.
Hello, darling. It's so nice to see you. Please come in. I so seldom get visitors these days. I must insist you stay a little longer. I have so much to tell you. Do you want to hear a real creepy tale? One that will chill you to the bone? One that will give you nightmares? Get comfortable and sit for a spell. I'm ready to begin. To understand the magnitude of my story, you must first know who I am. So here's a little backstory. I was born in 1954, so my formidable years spent growing up under the influence of the 60s and early 70s in a very small town in upstate Ohio. And when I say small, I mean one light at the corner of Broadway and Main Street. There were about 40 businesses in the center of town. The drugstore soda shop was right on one of these corners and was still there the last time I visited. There was also a hardware store, small grocery store, Ben Franklin's, gas station, barber shop. We had Baptist, Methodist, Lutheran, and Catholic churches, and most everyone went to one of them weekly. You get the picture. It was Mayberry. We also had a library, a post office, and the jail. The jail was set up so you could easily sneak right past the cop desk 9 times out of 10 to go see if anybody was in jail. If there was, we'd run errands for him, go get cigarettes, whatever, never bothering to ask what he went for. I was a curious, free-spirited, and completely wild and innocent child. A little bit later came the assassination of JFK, the Civil Rights Movement, Vietnam protests, and the hippie revolution, which I joined in becoming one of the very first hippies. So maybe you can now guess where this story is leading. Hitchhiking was commonplace in those days, so I did it a lot. For a little over 3 years, I made many trips all over the United States and Canada, much to the dismay of my mother. Sometimes I took friends. Sometimes I went alone, always with no money, no clothes, no worries. So many people tried to warn me of the dangers, but being very young and naive and feeling quite invincible, I ignored all of their well-meaning advice. This wasn't my first trip, nor was it my last, but it was the most memorable, and you'll now understand the gravity of the very close call that it was. June, 1969. I was 14. I was spending the night with my friend Dina, who lived in a neighboring mirrored town. I talked her into coming to San Francisco with me, and she just happened to have a brother living out there. She hadn't seen him in a while, so we headed out across the cow pasture to the highway, stuck out our thumbs, and it never took very long to get a ride, as you can probably imagine. We received many rides. A band tour bus picked us up on their way to a gig in Chicago, but we didn't want to make that big of a detour, so we passed, and I can't remember who the name of the band was. I remember another ride when we got into a Cadillac convertible with 4 black men and went to a Motown party down in Blacktown, Columbus, Ohio. We were the only white people at this party, and let me tell you, we had a blast. I never felt unwanted or in danger. In fact, the nice lady that lived in that apartment gave me a shirt, which I thought was so kind. Now, as an adult, I realized she was just trying to cover me up. God bless her wherever she is. The next ride was pretty cool until he picked up another hitchhiker, a lone guy who kept nagging him about how much trouble he was going to get in if he got caught taking these 2 underage girls across state lines, and I became very agitated and told him to shut up. We probably should have gotten out right then and there, but we stayed, and he wasn't dangerous, just annoying. Well, the driver had to stop for gas in Iowa, and Dina and I went into the restroom to freshen up, and when we came out, the cops were waiting for us, and we ended up in the Iowa City Jail. I'm sure our parents were contacted immediately, although I do not recall this. We were quite the attraction in this little jail. The cops would come up and talk to us, play cards. They'd bring us cigarettes, candy, donuts. Another Mayberry. I don't think we were there for very long before Dina's mom had driven out to pick us up, and after a conversation with her daughter, decided to drive us all the way to California. Well, that was about 1,900 miles. Unbelievable. I remember singing to the radio all the way to Nevada. I especially remember Mamas and the Papas. Are you going to San Francisco? Well, later we booked into a hotel in Reno. Boring. This is not what I signed up for. I tried to talk Dina into just taking off, and I realize now as an adult what a terrible selfish act that would have been and how devastating that would have been to her mom. Lucky for everyone, she refused to do that, so I stayed. Well, we finally made it to San Francisco, right on the corner of Haight and Ashbury, near Berkeley College, where all the hippie action was. Her mom tagging along. It was all so overwhelming to me. I was pretty cool for our little town, but this stuff was way out of my league. I did mention how very naive I was. I was not fully aware of things like drug addiction, but I saw it firsthand at Needle Park, and seeing everyone strung out on drugs scared me to death. I saw a lot of other things too that I cannot mention. Needless to say, I was shocked and I wanted to go home. I've never wanted to go back to California again, and I haven't been back to this day. I don't remember how many weeks I was gone on this particular adventure, but shortly thereafter I was at home watching TV with my mom, and it was July. It was all over the news about the Manson family and the infamous murders. I then realized how close I had come to being picked up by one of them, and possibly becoming one of their family. What if I would have taken off on my own, looking for adventure, and not stayed with Dina and her mom that night, hitchhiking alone through the desert, 9 hours away from Swan Ranch? What if that guy had not turned us into the cops in Iowa, and we would have been out there, just the two of us? Most assuredly, I or both of us would have gotten picked up by one of them. Later I found out that the family was recruiting people from Haight-Ashbury area, and also how irked I had been because I couldn't lose her mom. Every day I'm thankful that I did not get caught up in that. I was sure right for the picking, especially if they would have gotten a hold of me before I made it all the way to California. In all my adventures I was never beat up, raped, or murdered. I do believe that I was under divine protection. Well, did you like my tale? Do you have one to tell me? Please send me your true creepy tale to gorydetails@gmail.com. The link is below. Oh, and please, darling, like, comment, share, subscribe, and tap my bell if you'd like to be notified of upcoming tales. My very existence depends on you.
I've always been concerned about my husband's health. He was overweight since the day we met, but he never really tried to fix it. It wasn't really a concern in the beginning. Sure, being bigger isn't a bad thing, but that's only until it negatively impacts your health and your ability to function. It wasn't that he needed to fix his weight problem the entire time, but he really should have taken some steps to avoid getting bigger. He ignored the issue for so long, by the time I stepped in, he must have been over 400 pounds. He had trouble walking. He never wanted to get out of bed. In fact, he hardly wanted to do anything at all. I loved the poor guy, but he was a fucking mess. It was ridiculous. He had no motivation to even attempt diet or exercise. He complained about walking from the bed to the bathroom and absolutely despised going outside for any reason. He was slowly killing himself. I couldn't take it. It was painful for me to watch him suffer and literally not give a shit about it. I know it has to be hard to live like that, but he didn't care. He'd been told by myself and other doctors that he had to prove that he could lose weight through diet and exercise before he could get surgery. And he refused. He would rather be a disgusting recluse at home than do even something simple to fix himself. He hadn't let himself die yet, but he was hardly living at all. One day I finally had enough. The night before, he had almost rolled over on me in his sleep. It was the last straw for me. He'd nearly killed me. I couldn't take it anymore, and I needed to take things into my own hands. If he wasn't going to help himself, then I was going to have to do something drastic. There's no way he would be able to continue living this way, at least not for very long. That was the day that I told him I was going to help him solve his problems. He was less than excited. He didn't want to be fixed because that would mean living life. He didn't care that he could hardly walk. He didn't care that he ate at least 6 meals a day. And he absolutely did not care that he was no longer the person I had fallen in love with. He had become this lazy pig with no desire to live life. The only thing he wanted in the world was to stay in bed, eat food, and watch TV. I wasn't about to let him give up that easy. After the procedure, he would want to stay in shape. Once it was done, there was no way he'd ever want to go back to his repulsive lifestyle. Maybe we'd rekindle our spark. It took me a few weeks, but I was finally able to collect everything I needed from the hospital that I worked in. I set everything up so that he could stay in our bed while I worked. I put him under, and once I was sure that he was entirely unconscious, I began my work. It was a long day. Though plastic surgery is my field of expertise, he was a special case. Our home didn't have quite the same amenities as a hospital, some of those which he would need to heal as per usual. The healing process would need to be done slightly different than it would if he had gone in to get the work done. After the first part of the surgery was done, I waited for him to wake up. I was so excited for him to see what I had done, but it wasn't time yet. I knew he would be hungry when he woke up, so I decided to make him breakfast while he was still under. Knowing him, any dietary restrictions I gave him would be aggressively ignored. I had thought he would be ravenous as soon as he woke up, and I was correct. The first thing he asked for when he awoke was food. I smiled at him and handed him the plate. He had just lifted a piece of bacon from the plate when I stopped him. "Are you sure you want to eat that, honey? It isn't pork," I said with the sweetest smile I could muster on my face. This would be the true test to see if he was ready to finally lose all this weight. This would also be the test that I proved whether or not he was actually as disgusting as I had come to know. "Well, what is it, hun?" The piece of bacon was dangling from his lips as he asked. "It's human bacon. Do you still want to eat it?" This was the moment of truth. I watched, absolutely repulsed, as he took my statement into account and chewed the bacon in his mouth. He savored it for a moment, as though he was trying to discover every aspect of the flavor. Then he stopped. No, I'm not doing this. Go get me some real food." He said it suddenly, as though he'd only just realized it would be wrong to eat human flesh. "I'm not giving you anything else. You can either diet and eat the food that goes with it, or deal with this." I followed up by leaving the room to get him a plate of something healthy. By the time I came back, the plate was empty. I was appalled. I knew he was a pig, but I didn't know he would go to such lengths. "I brought you something so you can start your diet. You won't keep the weight off unless you eat healthy," I told him, trying to hide the nausea that coursed through my body. How could he eat the bacon after what I had told him? Could anyone really be that sick? He chuckled for a moment. "This is just some kind of trick to convince me to lose weight. I'm fine. I'm not doing your diet nonsense. I like the way that I live now. There's nothing wrong with me." I was shocked at his response, and I nearly dropped the plate I was holding. "You've got to be kidding me. You'd rather eat your own flesh than attempt to lose even just a little bit of weight. Don't you want to live the life we used to have? Don't you miss being able to walk more than 10 steps without being out of breath?" I was losing it. He was so adamantly against doing anything to help himself. "I told you already. I'm fine. There's no point in lying to me to try to convince me that something is wrong. I do have taste buds, you know. Obviously, the bacon is veal, which is nice because usually you don't go for something so expensive. You ought to feed me better. I need a lot of sustenance, you know." I turned to walk out of the room. I was entirely disgusted by his attitude towards everything and in his disbelief. His voice stopped me as I reached the door. "Oh, by the way, hun, I'm still numb from the chest down." That would be the anesthetic. I snipped at him as I walked out of the room. Over the next week, all of his meals consisted of meat from his own flesh. He insisted that it was veal and wouldn't believe a thing I said otherwise. At this point, I was too repulsed by his response to continue with it, and I decided to do the one thing that would prove to him that I hadn't been lying about feeding him human meat. I went into the room that morning and removed the cloth that kept his paralyzed body hidden from view. Then I removed the bandages that were covering his wounds. "What did you do?" he asked in surprise as he stared at the deep, scabbed-over cuts that covered his once large stomach. "We're running out of fat to get the bacon from. I told you that it wasn't veal." "You know what?" he said. "I don't care anymore. Never did. It's the most delicious thing I've ever tasted. If it makes you happy, we can keep doing this." He smiled at me as though it was an enticing offer. That day, I packed my suitcase. I walked out of the house, and I never went home. It's been months now, and I've moved far away. I think I've created a monster.
He Waits for You by Lindsay S. As the dead of winter approaches, you may find yourself alone at night, feeling isolated and abandoned in an all too empty bed as the night grows ever bleaker. Ghastly shadows dancing across the wall, the crying wind battering against your window, an ambulance siren in the distance, and there's no one there to convince you that you didn't hear those gunshots. There's no one there. No one there. But do not be afraid. He waits for you. Wait for the moon to hide itself, perhaps behind a gathering of clouds. Midnight is the best time to do this. Just close your eyes and hold your breath as you leave your bed. You may open your eyes once you exit your bedroom. Get dressed if you like, because you'll be leaving your house soon. Take nothing with you, except for what you can keep in your pockets. Then, drive out of town. Drive as far away from civilization as you possibly can. Eventually, the air will become still. Then a dense fog will form, just a short way down the road. You will hear nothing but silence as you approach it. Let it consume you and your vehicle. No harm will come to you from it. I promise. Do not be afraid. He waits for you. The fog will lift. You will see a dimly lit motel, stranded and alone in the night, just like you. As you walk inside, notice that there is no one else there. The only sign of human inhabitants will be a small key on the front desk. Take these keys. Wander the corridors until you find the proper room. You will soon know exactly where it is, but you won't know why. Use your key to enter this room. Walk in and lie down on the bed. It's no more comforting than your bed at home. There's nothing but pure silence for miles. Death hangs in the air all around you, and it's so cold. You're still alone and frightened, but it's okay. He's frightened too, and it's just so cold. Cold enough to hold the pillow close to your body, burying your face in its softness and embracing it. Pretend that it's a lover all you want. You won't feel any safer. But you will feel warmer. Open your arms, lift up your head. The warmth is his arms. 2 twisted, mutilated arms tracing down your body. There he is, and he's frightened too. You can see it in his blackened, spherical eyes, fixating upon your face and twinkling with the light of another dimension. The light shines in specks from beneath his parched skin, making him glow from the inside. Bruises cover his decaying neck, as well as deep, finger-wide indents. It's as if someone had tried to strangle him. He sighs and softly caresses your face. The skin of his hands begins to flake off onto you, and you want to sweep it away. But you're stunned, completely stunned by this strange creature that's completely enamored by you. At least you're not alone anymore. You'll then gather enough will to take your hands and gently lift him off you, placing him to your side. You get a better look at him. His legs are disturbingly crooked, having been broken in so many places and healed in ways that they just weren't meant to. And he won't stop staring at you. Small, glistening tears drip from his eyes. He shivers and trembles, trying to form words with his torn mouth. You can't tell exactly what he's trying to tell you. It doesn't matter for now, anyway. He will want to touch you, to hold you and to comfort you. Whatever pain you have ever felt from loneliness, whatever sorrow you may have felt in your entire life, he feels it. His tears fall onto you, and he lies back in submission. He will let you do anything you want to him. He knows that no matter what you do, it will never hurt him as much as what the others have done. It will never hurt him as much as the isolation he's felt in this motel. As you gaze upon his twinkling eyes, you may gain a sudden urge to mutilate him, to punish him for existing the way he does. But please, be kind. He loves you, after all. Spend the night with him. He'll let you do anything, and he won't be able to speak. But be sure to leave the room before sunrise. He will do everything in his power to keep you from leaving. He will grab onto you, cry and scream at you. Tears will keep gushing from his glowing eyes, disintegrating his skin even further. But no matter how much you pity him, leave. Resist him and leave. If you don't, you will be forever trapped and doomed to live the same existence that he does. Do not let him follow you. Just close the door behind you and lock it. You're alone again. Next thing you know, you'll wake up in your bed at home, sometime after the sun has risen. The events of last night will feel as if it were nothing but a dream. Everything in your home is where you left it last. Your car, your clothes, everything. Then, if you are lucky, something incredible will happen. Within a few days, you might just meet a new person. This person has everything you want, and it's as if they were made for you. Within time, the two of you will fall in love. You'll almost forget the ghoul in the motel, and forget about those glowing eyes staring at you. All that will matter is that you will be in love with this wonderful new person, and they will love you. But once they move in with you, things will grow progressively stranger. As you lie together in bed, you might hear a faint scratching on the door and an all too familiar cry. But do not worry, your companion will keep you from becoming too worried about it. The next night, the cry might become a shriek, the scratching will become a pounding, and only you can hear it. No matter how hard you try to convince your partner of what you hear, they will only tell you to go back to sleep. And one night, you will notice that the noises have vanished. Nights will be peaceful again, and it will be just you and your partner. But from then on, you will constantly look upon your lover's eyes. You will notice a new glow in their eyes, twinkling with the light of another dimension. Do not be afraid. He's waited so long for you.
My sister works at a pizza chain. I won't disclose which one, but it's in the next town over, so I have to take her there and pick her up. She works the evening shift, and typically this just results in a pretty peaceful drives. Especially the ones to pick her up, it's usually after dark, just me, the open road, and the radio. One night, though, was different from the rest by far, and I will never forget it. I had been picking her up and making this drive every other day for about a week at this point, so I knew it was far from normal when I got out on the highway and there was an intense, almost hungry darkness clinging to the treetops and the edges of the buildings as I left town. Normally out in the country you can see a lot of stars, way more than in town, and despite that night not having any cloud cover, the sky was pitch black. Not a single star was visible. That in itself was a little unusual, but it didn't bother me too bad. The road was almost unnervingly empty. Normally I pass at least a couple of cars going the other way, or see taillights far ahead. Not tonight. Even my own headlights felt like they were struggling to penetrate this heavy blanket of shadows that had wrapped the area. It was almost like wearing sunglasses at night, but much more intense and clearly not something I was in control of. I had a chilling feeling, almost like being watched. I glanced into the rearview mirror more than once, almost expecting to see something in my back seat, but I couldn't really see much due to how dark it was anyway. I tried to shake the unnerving feeling, but once clear of the trees, it only grew worse. This drive through open country, rolling hills, oil jacks, and saltwater disposals, there should have been more light. Those places normally had light, but it was so dim it was easy to miss, like it was being drowned. Normally the red blinking lights of cell towers and wind turbines filled the horizon, but they were nowhere to be seen. The shadows seemed to tug at the very edges of my headlights, resisting being parted as I zipped down the highway, off the road. At the edges of my headlights, I could see the fence line, barbed wire on T-posts. Just on the other side, there was a black, writhing mass. It ran all the way down the other side of the highway, not so much a single thing as it was a massive crowd, some sort of dark, shadowy forms of something that seemed like it might have once been human. These things watched the road intently, craving destruction, misfortune, pain, death. They were malevolent beings, wild and primal, pushed back by the light, but only barely. I could feel them watching. There were thousands of them. Despite how this freaked me out, I didn't dare increase the speed of my vehicle. I kept very careful control of it, though I didn't slow down either. Best to stay right at the speed limit and not risk falling into the misfortune those things were radiating. I kept between the lines. I watched the road in the dim, struggling light, but kept a watch on those things in my peripheral vision. I nearly had a small heart attack as I came up one hill and rounded the corner. As to my left, there was what I guess is a saltwater disposal that is normally really well lit, and it's close to the road that, like everything else, was very dim, which drew my attention to my right, where I saw a man. He was standing off the road, wearing a high-visibility jacket, hard hat, holding a stop sign in one hand and a flashlight in the other. The flashlight was waved side to side at about belt level, slow, swaying, as if signaling something. Startled and worried there might be a wreck further ahead, as the road here was much more hilly, a lot of up and down with low visibility. However, as I braked, which turned off cruise control, as I focused on the man, my car slowing down, I saw no face. It was as if shadows wore the clothes and held the sign, but there was otherwise nothing else there. And as my brain wrapped around that image, it was gone. The man just gone. I hadn't blinked. He hadn't stepped away. I hadn't passed him. He just vanished into thin air, like he'd never truly been there to begin with. My breath caught in my lungs a moment. My heart sped up. I only absently felt my foot move from the brake to the gas before nearly putting the pedal through the floor. The engine revved and roared, lurching forward hard. The screech of tires on asphalt reached my ears, and I snapped from the near panic trance and focused on the road once more. The headlights looked dimmer. These things, those shadowy figures, barely taller than the fence, seemed almost frenzied, somehow stopped by the physical barrier, and I was in no place to question why. Terrified, I struggled to force myself to only speed up to the speed limit. If not for muscle memory to hit cruise once at the right speed, I might have been doing 90 the rest of the way to town. I swallowed hard against the lump in my throat, barely aware of the radio anymore. As a matter of fact, I don't even remember what was playing at this point. I was too hyper-alert to what was going on outside my car, of keeping my hurtling hunk of fiberglass and steel between the white and yellow lines of the highway, as my mind tried to make sense of what I just witnessed. Down the hill, then up again. At the top of the hill, I could see another car heading the opposite way on the second from the next hill. Down the hill, as I climbed up again, despite how much I didn't want to, I turned off my high beams, not wanting to blind the other driver. I crested the top, where we should have passed, down the hill, up on the one where I'd seen the other person head down again. I never passed the other driver. No car pulled off the road, no sign of anyone having actually been there. Now shaken, I flipped the high beams back on again, saying out loud, "What the actual hell?" I knew there was nowhere to pull off the highway without still being seen at some point in those hills. A car couldn't simply vanish, but it just had. One moment there was headlights, and then there was nothing. I tried to rationalize it as I went, but no matter what I came up with, none of it seemed to fit. Climbing the next hill, I could see the low, hazy light of a security light. The orange glow was like a weak shield over the ranch house The blanket of shadows seemed to be gnawing at the edges of the house and the other buildings on the property. Those shadowy creatures milling about around the edges of the light, biding their time. Starting down this hill, I could see a huge pool of light on the right side of the road. There was an equipment yard there, something else oil field related, and it was always really well lit. It was the brightest thing I'd seen thus far, and even its light was hazier and weaker than normal, coating the yard but not really reaching past. In overcast weather, this place was bright enough to reflect off the clouds. However, tonight that light just rose lazily upwards, like flashlights being shined at the sky, glowing towards nothing, just empty, impenetrable darkness. I passed the yard by, my car gracefully gliding down the hill en route to the Y. I kept in the correct lane to get where I was going, white-knuckle grip on the steering wheel, forcefully even breaths, and weary gaze holding the highway ahead, following the Y, turning steadily to the left and heading uphill to meet up with the other highway, seamlessly left me high atop the next hill. Though it only seemed so high as it dipped steeply into the valley below, there was a lot of open, flat-ish land at the bottom of the hill before the next one, so I could normally see the reflections of signs, the lights of a couple more yards of some sort off to the right, and that sort of thing. Not tonight. It was pitch black, driving into the dark, inky abyss that was only revealed in increments, illuminated by my headlights and nothing more. Again, I had to force myself to breathe evenly, keeping my eyes on everything. I could still feel those shadowy figures on the other side of the fence lines, as if they'd come from deep in the fields to lash at the road but couldn't quite reach. Watching my car with eyes I couldn't see but could certainly feel, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end, all my muscles tense. Up the next hill, not near as high or as steep as the last. To my right, the hill rose in a cliff. To my left, it dropped off. The median, a small gully between hills. It was deep, and trees rising up from it. However, tonight, in the cloying shadows, it looked as if it was a pit that dropped into the depths of hell itself. Too deep, too dark to fathom, but an uneasy negative feeling wafting up out of it like smoke off of an unholy fire. I kept focused on the road. As this part twisted and turned, narrow between the cliffside and the gully, the shadows were deep. Those creatures high up on the hill, I half expected rocks to start tumbling down, but thankfully that did not happen. Gradually, as I made the last turn, the hill started receding down, becoming more a gentle roll, and the road going down to meet the level of the gully, basically meeting the end of it. The median was narrower here, a line of trees between either side of the highway. As it twisted and wound towards the next slight hill, the town at the bottom. As I crested the hill, I could see the city beyond was just as shrouded in darkness as everything else, the thick shadows drowning out the street lights, the business signs, the lights over the parking lots. Roads branched off the highway seemed to just vanish into an abyss of shadows. Streetlights further in, little more than scattered freckles of vague blue and orange. I followed the gradual descent and curve of the road further into town, weary of darting shadows and hungry darkness. Finally, I reached my destination, turning into the parking lot behind my sister's work. Even it, the pizza joint, normally an island of bright light against the highway, had dark patches, shadows unfathomably deep, a black so pitch it was like holes in reality. I was on edge, putting the car in park and waiting, unable to do anything but watch the shadows around me. I am not sure how long I waited, but it can often be quite a while. Thus I nearly jumped out of my skin when she pulled on the door handle. Glancing over and seeing my sister, I reached up and unlocked the door. She was quick to get in. "Geez, it's dark out there, you notice?" she asked. "Yeah, believe me," I nodded, and was quick to get us moving. On the trip back, we discussed the darkness, pointing out to each other the things I've already told you about here. Both of us were unnerved, but I did feel better having her company and her confirmation of everything I'd been seeing. It was the most terrifying drive of my life, but it was less so on the trip home. The shadows were just as thick, though. The road was just as dead, to which my sister even joked that we'd fallen into an alternate dimension. The odd part is, I'm not so certain she was wrong. As we got closer to our hometown, she threw out the theory that perhaps the odd phenomenon was caused by the eclipse a couple of days prior, and I was inclined to agree. It made sense, at least to us. Once at our home, parked in the driveway, I finally cut the engine, removing my keys. We were hesitant to exit the car, but once we did, my sister pointed out the oddity of the streetlight. You see, across from our house is an empty field, and next to that is a new house. Between the fence and the road, there's a tall street lamp. The glow, normally bright, annoyingly so, and illuminating a lot, tonight it spilled into the street, but barely reached our yard, and did not penetrate the darkness in the field directly behind it, almost as if the fence was actually a wall. The darkness rose up all the way against our new neighbor's house. "R.I.P. them if they go out the back door tonight," my sister muttered in comment of the shadows. It really did feel like the darkness could swallow someone whole. It was everywhere, too. Anywhere strong light didn't cascade. We were quick to get into the safety of our home, making sure the doors and windows were locked tightly. We still aren't sure the source of the strange occurrence, though it was far from the last of the strangeness we have experienced on that highway at night. For now, though, the story ends here. Until we meet again, remember, always respect the dead.
Let me get this out of the way. This is not a cursed internet chain letter. You will not be asked to forward this story. Reading it or hearing it will not kill or curse you. This is a story about my childhood, a memory, one that just resurfaced, kicking and screaming to the forefront of my mind. I'd managed to forget about it, but the past always has a way of coming back around. I was a kid when the internet was new and cell phones were an expensive novelty. I didn't have as many distractions as modern children, but it wasn't for lack of trying. Rather than pay attention in class, I'd create my own distractions. In the 4th grade, I invented a game for the entire class to play. It was a simple game that involved passing a note to everyone without getting caught. Our class was small and tight-knit, and since Mrs. Knott was almost spitefully boring, even the most straight-laced girl in our class, Lydia, couldn't resist participating. The game didn't have a name. We figured if we didn't name it, it would be a lot harder to get caught. We didn't even use the word game. We referred to it as taking notes, just in case anyone overheard. A lot of the fun came from the secrecy, and the ninja moves we had to master in order to pass the note around unnoticed. There were only 3 rules. 1. Don't get caught. 2. Add something. 3. Pass it on. We won when the note was passed around and came back to me. At recess, we'd read the note and have a good laugh. Sometimes we'd collectively make up one big story or each share a joke. It all depended on what I wrote first. It was only a little bit of power, but it still went straight to my head. We always won. I'm not sure if it was because we really were master sneaks or because Mrs. Knott didn't care. In order to be stealthy enough to play, we were well behaved and didn't interrupt lessons. It was a harmless game. Part of our camouflage required us to actually take notes for class. It was funny. I didn't realize that the game inadvertently defeated the purpose. Kids really aren't as clever as they think they are, at least I wasn't. I remember when everything changed. The game started off like it always did. Every time the teacher turned to write something on the whiteboard, the note changed hands. I could hear the scratching of pencils and pens on paper with the quiet monotony of the lesson. The silence was shattered when Lydia jumped out of her seat, stumbling backwards and tripping on her own feet. Every eye in the room turned to watch the girl fumble and fret, as she quickly collected her papers off the floor and sat back down at her desk without a word. It was obvious she was upset about something. Her round cheeks quivered, and she absently began wringing her braids, breathing hard. "Lydia, are you all right?" Mrs. Knott asked. "I am fine. I thought I saw a spider. A big one." It was an answer the teacher accepted. No one likes spiders. Girls especially don't. "I'm so sorry for interrupting, Mrs. Knott." Lydia hung her head, her voice soft and brimming with embarrassment. Her embarrassment seemed to be punishment enough because the teacher nodded and turned back to the whiteboard. When she did, I saw Lydia fold up the note and pass it on. I turned my attention back to my note-taking, and before long, the note made its way back to me. I didn't look at it right away. Instead, I carefully closed the folded piece of paper between the pages of my notebook. Homework was passed out, then the bell rang. Time for lunch. The class seemed quieter than usual as we filed out and headed for the cafeteria. Lydia stopped me in the hallway. Her face was still red and her eyes glossy, with unshed tears. Lydia usually kept to herself. She participated in taking notes, but she was shy and didn't usually socialize unless she had to. "What's the matter?" I asked, perplexed. We were alone in the hall. Staff and students alike didn't waste time going to lunch, especially on pizza day. I felt a flutter of annoyance, but given the look on Lydia's face, I pushed it back. "Don't show the note at recess." Her hands gripped her long braids. "Please." "Why?" I asked, immediately reaching for my notebook so I could see what the problem was. "Half the class already saw it since you passed it on." "I wish I hadn't." She was pulling on her braids. I was worried she might pull them right off her head. Taking notes isn't fun anymore. Not if it's gonna be like this." "Like what?" My first thought was that someone drew boobs or wrote swears. Either of those options would have been scandalous to our 4th grade sensibilities. Lydia looked at the note I was unfolding, chewing on her bottom lip. She didn't explain, but the reason for her distress was immediately apparent. It was Lydia. A drawing of her. So well drawn there could be no mistake. It was almost like looking at a black and white photograph, if not for the horizontal blue lines faintly visible beneath the expert pencil strokes. The drawing was not at a 4th grade level, but that wasn't what was alarming about it. In the picture, there was a horizontal cut across her stomach. One hand held the wound open, bloody fingers digging in to pry the apparently self-inflicted wound wider. Her other hand unraveled intestines, pulling them to gore-smeared lips as though she were about to slurp them up like noodles. Her chubby arms were bloody up to the elbow. Even in black and white, I could tell what I was looking at. The rivulets were dark and glossy, even forming a reflective pool to display the gore from a different angle. Never in my life had I seen something like this. Even scary movies were incapable of such disturbing detail. I wanted to throw up just looking at it. I couldn't imagine how Lydia must have felt. Once the full impact of the drawing hit me, I came back to my senses and crumpled the paper into a tight ball. "I won't show anyone," Lydia nodded, shuffling from foot to foot in an awkward dance of nerves. The girl opened her mouth to say something else, then thought better of it, scurrying down the hall. I had lost my appetite. No doubt Lydia did too. The air was thick with unasked questions. Who had drawn that? When I'd started the note, that drawing hadn't been there. I really didn't think anyone in the class would have or could have drawn it. There was no obvious explanation, but I didn't want to think about it. For some reason, it felt wrong to even wonder. I didn't want to know. I wanted to pretend it didn't happen. At recess, Half the kids protested when I said I had lost the note. The other half was conspicuously quiet. No one mentioned the drawing. There seemed to be an unspoken rule. We couldn't talk about it. We didn't want to. It was unanimous. The next day, Lydia wasn't in class. At first, I wasn't going to play the game, but some of the kids kept looking at me expectantly. Only about half the class knew what happened. The other half expected we'd be taking notes as usual. For some reason, pretending it didn't happen seemed like the most sensible option. The game continued. I tore out a fresh sheet of notebook paper and stared down at it blankly, unsure of how to start this one. Any sense of mischief or fun was long gone for me. I didn't want to play anymore. Why did it feel like I had to? I scribbled something down, I don't even remember what, but I didn't really pay attention until the dreaded note made its way back. I didn't open it, tucking it away and trudging to lunch when the bell rang. I felt like a prisoner to the game. It was only a piece of paper, but it felt heavy to me. I didn't know what I'd see. I couldn't convince myself that the game hadn't changed in some fundamental way. I wasn't the only one who felt that way. Just days before, we were all laughing and smiling. Not anymore. Only about half the class waited eagerly for me at recess, the other half trickling in, heavy-footed with reluctance. It was as if they were here out of obligation. As I smoothed out the creased note, I almost wasn't surprised to see the drawing. This time it was Brian. A grisly scene sketched out with such realistic detail that my brain refused to register what I was looking at first. Bubbling, blistered, and blackened skin might have left him indistinguishable, if not for the fact that his face was left untouched by the licking, angry flames, drawn out in color this time, red, orange, yellow, and black. Brian's dimpled smile and freckled nose were unmistakable. His body positioned in a crouch beside roaring flames as though he were merely warming himself by a campfire, arms extended out over the flames, hands rubbing together, charred skin flaking off with friction, peppering the roaring flames. I pressed my hand over the drawing, covering it up. But it was too late. We'd already seen it. Even the drawing felt hot beneath my palm, words and bile competing in my throat as my eyes skimmed the rest of the note. Everything else was harmless, snippets of conversation and jokes, benign doodles. I recognized the handwriting, knew who wrote or doodled what. Everyone was accounted for except for Lydia. The only addition I couldn't explain was that drawing. It was as though some malevolent presence had decided to include itself in our game, uninvited. No one spoke of it, but it was clear from the shock and tears. We'd all seen it this time. When I pulled my hand away from the drawing, it came away stained red and black. I buried the note, along with the one depicting Lydia by the sledding hill, a cluster of silent children. It felt like a funeral. Brian and Lydia were both absent the next day. No one wanted to play, but all of us felt strangely compelled to participate. I ripped a new page from my notebook, not caring when the paper ripped like jagged teeth along the side. I started the game with a plea. I don't want to play anymore. The scrawled message almost illegible, as if even this violated some implicit rule. I had to pass it on, watching the paper fall reluctantly into William's shaky hand. No one was writing notes today, or even trying to pay attention to the lesson. Every eye in the room followed the path of the note as it changed hands. The teacher didn't notice the room was far too quiet, her back turned to us the entire time. When the note came back to me, I knew I shouldn't take it. If I did, something horrible would happen. The game only ended when it came back to me. What if we didn't let it end? I shook my head, pointing towards the garbage can instead. A look of understanding passed between us before Jeremy's extended arm lowered to toss the folded paper in an underhanded arc. The entire class seemed to watch with bated breath. His aim was true, but once the note landed, the boy collapsed onto his desk, head hitting the wood with a thunk as though he were suddenly overtaken by a sudden and powerful wave of exhaustion. I feared the worst for a moment, but Jeremy managed to raise his arm with a reassuring thumbs up as he caught his breath. We never played the game again. Lydia and Brian never returned to school. As children, we were spared any sort of explanation, and no one asked. I spent the rest of that year, and every year after that, as a serious student. No games of any kind. I didn't even go to recess, opting to work on homework or read books in the quiet solitude of the library instead. I didn't think about what happened for a long time. I moved on with my life. Until last night. I was drinking by myself at the bar into the early hours, hoping that liquor would lubricate my sleepless night. An old woman claimed the seat beside me, her body stooped with age, but that didn't stop her from swallowing several shots in quick succession. I didn't pay her much mind, staring vacantly at the assortment of hard liquor as a drunken haze began to sweep over me like a warm blanket. I could feel the woman's intense stare as she slid a piece of paper towards me. A soft rustle I somehow heard even over the loud music and drunken laughter. I picked it up absently, our eyes meeting for only the briefest instant. I knew instantly I'd made a mistake. I recognized the woman. It was Mrs. Knott. There was no doubt about it. She hadn't aged well, her eyes dark and haunted, features haggard and pale, as though her body was made of papier-mâché, her head lolled on a thin neck that was barely capable of supporting the weight. I looked down at the paper in my hand, notebook paper, folded into a neat square. "It's finally over." Mrs. Knott began to sob with relief and regret, her once stern facade long broken. She didn't explain, although her eyes seemed to apologize as she left payment on the counter. "It will all go away now. It's over. It's finally over." But it wasn't over for me. I didn't need to open the note to know what it was. For all these years, that last game had gone unfinished, until Mrs. Knott finally passed it on, back to me. The note is on my desk, unopened. It doesn't matter. Even if I don't look, the game is over. I don't even need to wonder who this game will claim next. Although I live alone, I haven't been alone since the note found its way back. From the corner of my eye, a dark, ungraspable shape asks,
"Aren't you curious?"
I wrote my story knowing no one will believe it. There isn't time to do anything else. Fortunately, there's nothing to leave behind. No family, no friends, not even a pet. Maybe I knew this would happen all along, somewhere deep down. I didn't want anyone to miss me.
"Aren't you curious?"
I smile, giving my defeated reply. Surprise me.
It's late at night. Very late. Your eyes are a little sore, but you aren't ready to go to bed yet. The thread you're reading on X is interesting enough to keep you awake, and to tell the truth, it has you a little too creeped out to close your eyes just yet. You know they're just stories, written by people just like you, and in the beginning, these creepy stories serve to give you a good chill before bed. But the more you read them, the more you wonder if some of them might be based on reality. Yes, the Candle Cove story is confirmed fiction. But didn't you see things as a kid that no one else seemed to see? Weren't there things you tried to explain to your parents? Fears that they couldn't understand? Eventually, you learned that your parents were older and knew your fears were irrational. But what if they weren't? What if you did see something they couldn't see? No, you think to yourself. That's just silly. They're only stories. But then again, there are other stories that throw your skepticism off a little. The Smile JPEG news article is obviously fake. A Photoshop picture of a dog smiling couldn't possibly make people go insane or want to kill themselves. But now that you look at the picture, it does make you feel weird. Not insane, Not suicidal, but definitely not normal. Stop it, you say to yourself. You're acting like a child. It's okay to be scared of creepy stories when you're 11 years old at a sleepover. But now you're older, and you know these things are only works of the imagination. Still, you can't shake those feelings. Eventually, you've worked yourself into a fear that is just strong enough to keep you awake once you've closed the computer. You feel silly, but didn't you just see a shadow move out of the corner of your eye? And what was that noise that came from inside the wall behind your bed? You glance at yourself in the mirror, but you just don't look quite right. You feel a chill. Suddenly, you find yourself pulling your feet under the covers, although you can't explain why. You have to go to the bathroom, but there's no way you're getting out of bed. You can only lay there, paranoid and alert, until the sun comes up and the light fills your room. And then maybe that thing in your closet will stop watching you